What if I told you that some of history's most famous tales aren't just stories but echoes of real places, real people, and real events that time forgot? Think about it for a moment. We've all grown up hearing whispers of lost cities, divine encounters, and legendary artifacts. But what if there's more to these myths than mere imagination? What if hidden within these ancient chronicles are truths waiting to be uncovered? From the sunken spires of Atlantis to the secluded valleys of Shangri-La, humanity has always been captivated by the idea that there's more to our world than meets the eye, more history, more mystery, and more magic lingering just beyond the edge of known maps and recorded time. Today, we're setting out on a journey unlike any other, a grand exploration of 30 mythical chronicles drawn from sacred realms across cultures and millennia. This isn't just a tour of familiar legends, it's an invitation to look closer, to question deeper, and to wonder boldly. These are stories that have gripped poets, inspired explorers, and puzzled historians for centuries. They live in that tantalizing space where myth and memory overlap, where oral traditions hint at geological events, and where ancient symbols might just hold the keys to understanding civilizations that vanished without a trace. We'll wander through lush Elysian fields, stand before gates said to lead to other worlds, and decipher texts that challenge everything we assume about human achievement and belief. So whether you're a seasoned history buff or simply curious about the unknown, you're in the right place. This is about more than listing legends. It's about rediscovering the awe and mystery that define our shared human story. Together, we'll decode cryptic manuscripts, examine archaeological anomalies, and venture into realms where gods walked among mortals and miracles were woven into everyday life. By the end of our journey, you won't just know these myths, you'll feel them. You'll understand why they endure, why they resonate, and why, after all this time, they still have the power to make us wonder, what if? And so we begin with perhaps the most enduring enigma of them all, the lost city of Atlantis. Our sole original source for this legend comes not from some obscure, fragmented text, but from the famed Greek philosopher Plato, who laid out its story in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. This wasn't presented as a mere fable, but as a true historical account passed down to the Athenian statesman Solon by Egyptian priests. They described a formidable naval power that existed 9,000 years before Plato's time, an island nation located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. This placement puts it squarely in the vast, unexplored expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, a sea that itself bears the city's name. Plato's description is astonishingly precise, painting a picture of a civilization of almost unimaginable sophistication and wealth. The capital city was a marvel of engineering, built on a hill and surrounded by concentric rings of water and land, connected by bridges and tunnels wide enough for a trireme to sail through. At its heart stood a glorious temple to Poseidon, clad in silver and gold, and a grand royal palace that had been passed down through generations. The Atlanteans possessed advanced technology, harnessed the power of mysterious crystals, and lived in a virtual utopia. But here lies the crucial twist in Plato's tale. This wasn't just a history lesson. It was a moral parable. The people of Atlantis, initially virtuous and noble, became corrupted by their own power and greed. They grew arrogant, launching a failed military campaign against the ancient Athenians, and in a single day and night of cataclysm, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever. Their downfall was a divine punishment, a warning about the dangers of imperial overreach and spiritual decay. This compelling blend of precise detail and moral allegory is precisely what has fueled the search for Atlantis for centuries. If it was just a story, why include such specific geographical and architectural details? This question has driven theorists to propose countless potential locations. Some point to the Minoan civilization on the island of Santorini, whose incredible volcanic eruption around 1600 BC decimated the island and likely inspired tsunami myths throughout the region. Others look to the Richat structure in Mauritania, a striking natural formation of concentric rings visible from space that matches Plato's description with an almost eerie accuracy. Speculation has also placed Atlantis in the Caribbean, near the Azores, or even beneath the frozen wastes of Antarctica. Each theory brings its own piece of the puzzle, a matching geological event, a similar cultural memory in local myths, or archaeological ruins that suggest a complex society was lost to the sea. Yet, despite these tantalizing clues, no definitive proof has ever been found. The search for Atlantis is a perfect example of how a single ancient story can blossom into a timeless mystery, sitting at the intersection of history, geology, and human imagination. It challenges us to ask what we consider to be real. Was Atlantis a real place that met a tragic end, its story diluted into myth over millennia? Or was it purely a brilliant philosophical device created by Plato to illustrate a point about the ideal state and its potential for corruption? Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between, a tale inspired by a real catastrophic event woven together with older legends and philosophical ideals. The city's disappearance into the deep symbolizes all that we have lost to time, a ghost of a golden age that continues to beckon from the depths of our collective memory. From the sunken metropolis, we journey now to a place of a very different kind of lost, not a city claimed by the sea, but a garden severed from humanity by its own choices. The story of the Garden of Eden is perhaps the most profound and personal of all mythical chronicles, a narrative not of a fallen civilization, but of our own fallen state. Found in the opening chapters of Genesis, Eden is described as the divine birthplace of humanity, a paradise planted by God Himself where the first man and woman lived in perfect harmony with their Creator and the natural world. The text offers specific, tantalizing details. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, filled with every tree pleasing to the eye and good for food, and it was the source of 4 mighty rivers: the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. This was a realm of innocence and abundance, where work was a joy and shame was unknown, a sanctuary where humanity walked alongside divinity. This idyllic existence, however, was defined by a single prohibition: not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent's temptation and the subsequent choice to disobey shattered that harmony, introducing shame, toil, pain, and ultimately exile. The couple was driven out, and cherubim with a flaming sword were placed to guard the way back to the tree of life, sealing paradise lost. This powerful origin story has resonated for millennia, framing the human condition as a longing to return to a state of grace and wholeness we can barely remember. But like Atlantis, the precision of its geographical clues has sparked an endless quest to find its physical location on a map. The mention of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers immediately anchors the story in the region of ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. This has led many scholars and explorers to search for the other 2 rivers, the Pishon and Gihon, in an attempt to pinpoint Eden's epicenter. Some theories suggest the now dry riverbeds of the Arabian Peninsula or the Kharan River in Iran could be the elusive Pishon, described as winding through the land of Havilah, a place rich in gold and aromatic resin. Others propose that the Persian Gulf itself was once a fertile river valley flooded at the end of the last ice age, a lush garden swallowed not by earthquake but by rising sea levels, a theory that hauntingly echoes the fate of Atlantis. The quest for a historical Eden is further complicated by the fact that the concept of a primordial, perfect garden is not unique to the Hebrew Bible. The ancient Sumerians, who inhabited Mesopotamia long before the Genesis account was written, spoke of Dilmun, a pure and blessed land where sickness and death were unknown. In this sacred realm, the gods were born and lived in a state of innocence, Similarly, ancient Greek myths told of the gardens of the Hesperides, where golden apples that granted immortality grew under the watchful eyes of nymphs and a fearsome dragon. The Persian concept of paradisa, a walled garden or paradise, was a symbol of order and beauty in a chaotic world, a term that directly evolved into the English word paradise. These recurring motifs suggest a deep, universal human yearning for a golden age, a perfect beginning from which we have strayed. This shared mythology points less to a single, discoverable location and more to a collective memory, perhaps of the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to the hardships of agricultural life, or a psychological archetype of a time before the complexities of consciousness and morality. Archaeology may never uncover a signpost reading, "Welcome to Eden," but it has revealed the incredible richness of the Fertile Crescent, the very region described in Genesis. This was the cradle of civilization where agriculture first flourished, creating a bounty that to ancient people would have indeed seemed paradisiacal. The enduring power of the Eden story lies not in its potential coordinates, but in its profound symbolism. It represents the genesis of human self-awareness, the dawn of choice, and the eternal consequences that follow. It is the story of every person who has ever longed for a simpler time, for a reconnection with nature, and for a sense of belonging in the universe. The flaming sword that guards the entrance is not just a barrier to a physical place, but a reminder that our path forward is not one of return, but of seeking a redemption that lies ahead. Leaving behind the sunken dreams of Atlantis and the guarded gates of Eden, we now ascend into the highest peaks on Earth, where the air is thin and the line between myth and reality seems to blur into the mist. Here, nestled in the formidable embrace of the Himalayas, lies the legend of Shangri-La, a sanctuary of eternal peace that has captivated the Western imagination for nearly a century. While many of us know the name from the 1933 novel Lost Horizon by James Hilton, this fictional paradise was itself a reflection of a far older and more profound spiritual belief. Hilton's story of a plane crash that leads a group of travelers to discover a hidden valley where people age slowly and live in harmonious isolation was a product of its time, a weary world's response to the grim aftermath of the First World War and the looming anxieties of industrialization. But the soul of Shangri-La is much, much older. Its true antecedent is Shambhala, a celestial kingdom central to Tibetan Buddhist and Hindu Kalachakra teachings. Unlike Hilton's accessible valley, Shambhala is not a physical place one can simply stumble upon. It is described as a pure land, a hidden realm encircled by snowy mountains, accessible only to those with the purest karma and the most advanced spiritual understanding. It is a kingdom of peace and wisdom, destined to remain untouched by the outside world's corruption and strife until a future time when its righteous king will lead an army to defeat the forces of darkness and usher in a golden age. This is not a story of a paradise lost, but one of a paradise preserved and waiting, a beacon of hope that exists outside of linear time, offering a profound spiritual goal rather than a geographical destination. This hasn't stopped the determined quest to find its physical counterpart on a map. The allure of a tangible hidden valley is simply too powerful to resist. In the late 19th century, rumors of a mystical green oasis hidden in the Tibetan plateau captivated esoteric societies and even influenced real political ambitions. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky wrote of secret masters residing in Shambhala, and some historians suggest this mythos may have indirectly fueled the Nazi expeditions to Tibet, a bizarre chapter in history where occult beliefs drove a search for the origins of the so-called Aryan race. In the modern era, the search has been less sinister but no less passionate. The stunningly beautiful Hunza Valley in northern Pakistan, where residents are known for their remarkable longevity and the valley is lush amid barren mountains, has long been proposed as a potential inspiration. The people there themselves often embrace the connection, their stunning landscape and unique culture seeming to mirror Hilton's descriptions so perfectly. Perhaps the most definitive claim, however, comes from China. In 2001, the county of Zhongdian in Yunnan province officially renamed itself Shangri-La, a strategic move to cement its identity as the true location and capitalize on the potent tourism appeal of the myth. Nestled in the Himalayan foothills with its soaring monasteries, deep gorges, and diverse ethnic cultures, the area certainly possesses an otherworldly beauty that feels separate from the modern world. Yet, this act of naming highlights a fascinating tension: the modern world's desire to pin down and commodify a legend that, by its very definition, must remain elusive and unspoiled. The moment you can buy a ticket to Shangri-La, it ceases to be Shangri-La. The real power of this myth, from its ancient Buddhist origins to its modern literary incarnation, lies in what it represents for the human spirit. It is the ultimate expression of our longing for a refuge, a place insulated from the relentless march of time, political turmoil, and the noise of modern life. It is a dream of purity and permanence in a world defined by decay and change. We may never find its coordinates, and perhaps that is the point. Its enduring mystery reminds us that the most valuable treasures are not places we can visit, but states of being we must cultivate within ourselves. But our journey now takes a dramatic turn from the secluded spiritual heights of the Himalayas to the sweltering, dense jungles of South America, where a different kind of dream has lured explorers to their doom for centuries: the dream of gold. The legend of El Dorado stands as one of history's most potent and dangerous myths, a tale that began not with a city but with a man. In the early 16th century, Spanish conquistadors, fresh from their plunder of the Inca and Aztec empires, heard a mesmerizing story from the Muisca people of the Colombian highlands. It spoke of a ritual performed at Lake Guatavita, where a new tribal chief, or Zipa, would be covered entirely in gold dust. This gilded man would then embark on a ceremonial raft, laden with gold and emeralds as offerings to the gods, and plunge into the sacred waters to wash the gold from his body. To the Spanish, this figure became known as El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man. It was this single, shimmering image that ignited an obsession. The Spanish, whose entire colonial enterprise was fueled by a ravenous appetite for precious metals, could not conceive of a culture that would simply throw such wealth into a lake. They reasoned that a people with so much gold to spare must possess a source of unimaginable riches, and so the story began to mutate and grow in the telling. The Golden Man was no longer just a chief, he was the king of a city paved with gold. El Dorado transformed from a person into a place, a lost city hidden deep within the uncharted and unforgiving Amazon rainforest. This legendary metropolis, with its temples of gold and rivers running with jewels, became the ultimate prize, a siren's call that would pull hundreds of expeditions into the green hell of the jungle. The consequences of this quest were almost uniformly tragic. The most infamous of these expeditions was led by the English courtier Sir Walter Raleigh, who made 2 desperate voyages in search of the city, which he believed was located in Guyana. He failed spectacularly, losing his fortune, his son, and ultimately his head when he defied King James I by attacking a Spanish outpost during his second failed attempt. The German explorer Philip von Hutten spent years wandering the Venezuelan jungle, only to be murdered upon his return by a rival who wanted to claim his non-existent riches. For every hopeful adventurer who entered the Amazon basin, the jungle offered nothing but disease, starvation, hostile encounters, and despair. El Dorado became less a destination and more a phantom, a mirage that seemed to recede further into the wilderness with every step taken toward it, proving that the greatest treasure the conquistadors found was the story itself, a narrative that consumed them utterly. For a very long time, historians and archaeologists dismissed the notion of a sophisticated, gold-rich city in the Amazon. The prevailing wisdom was that the soil was too poor to support large-scale, complex societies. The legend was written off as a classic case of European avarice and misunderstanding, but a revolution in technology is now forcing a complete reassessment of that view. The use of LiDAR, a remote sensing technology that uses laser light to penetrate dense forest canopy and map the ground beneath, has revealed something astonishing. Vast networks of ancient roads, complex earthworks, large plazas, and even pyramids have been discovered in the Bolivian and Brazilian Amazon. These weren't small, nomadic tribes. These were interconnected, organized societies that managed the rainforest in sophisticated ways, potentially supporting populations in the tens of thousands. These discoveries don't point to a literal city of gold, but they do suggest that the Amazon was once home to civilizations far more advanced and wealthy than previously believed. It is now entirely plausible that early European explorers did indeed encounter or hear stories of these impressive settlements. The gold artifacts and ceremonial practices of cultures like the Muisca were real. When these factual elements were filtered through the lens of conquistador greed and amplified by generations of storytelling, they crystallized into the perfect myth. El Dorado endures because it speaks to the very core of human desire. It represents the ultimate shortcut, the dream of a reward so vast it can solve all problems and fulfill all ambitions. It is a cautionary tale about the destructive power of obsession, and yet it remains an irresistible promise that the world still holds secret wonders, waiting just beyond the next river bend for those brave or foolish enough to go looking. From the humid, gold-fueled fantasies of the Amazon, we travel to the cool, misty landscapes of the British Isles, where the air itself seems to whisper of magic and a different kind of treasure, one not of material wealth but of eternal rest and mystical healing. The legend of Avalon, the fabled island of apples, is woven into the very heart of the Arthurian cycle, a saga that has defined Western concepts of chivalry, destiny, and loss for over 1,000 years. Unlike the sprawling searches for Atlantis or El Dorado, the quest for Avalon is intensely localized, focusing on a single, hauntingly beautiful location in Somerset, England, Glastonbury Tor. This solitary hill, rising dramatically from the surrounding flat wetlands known as the Somerset Levels, has been a site of spiritual significance for millennia. Its unique geology, standing like an island when the winter floods came, made it a natural symbol of separation from the everyday world, a place where the veil between the physical and the spiritual was considered dangerously thin. The earliest literary references to Avalon come from the 12th century, from chroniclers like Geoffrey of Monmouth. He described it as the place where King Arthur's legendary sword, Excalibur, was forged, and more importantly, where the mortally wounded king was taken after the tragic Battle of Camlan. It was not a place of death but of healing. The island was said to be ruled by 9 mystical sisters, the most powerful of whom was Morgan Le Fay, a figure of immense magical power who was both healer and sorceress. In Avalon, Arthur would rest and be made whole again, awaiting the time of his people's greatest need to return. This concept of a timeless, healing sanctuary draws directly from much older Celtic mythology. In pre-Christian Britannic and Irish traditions, the otherworld was not a distant heaven but a parallel realm often located on islands across the Western Sea, places like Turna and Og, the land of youth where time moved differently and sickness and old age held no power. These islands were frequently associated with apple trees, the fruit symbolizing immortality, magic, and the otherworldly. The very name Avalon is derived from the Welsh word afal, meaning apple, solidifying its place in this ancient symbolic landscape. The connection to Glastonbury became cemented in history, or rather in a brilliant piece of historical publicity, in the year 1191. Following a devastating fire that destroyed their abbey, monks at Glastonbury needed funds for a grand reconstruction. They announced an astounding discovery. Deep in the ancient cemetery between 2 stone pyramids, they had unearthed a hollowed-out oak log containing the gigantic skeletons of a man and a woman. A lead cross placed atop the burial bore the inscription, in Latin, Hic jacet sepultus inclitus rex Arthurus in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. The timing was politically fortuitous for the Plantagenet king, Henry II, who had an interest in quelling Welsh rebellions fueled by the prophecy of Arthur's return. By finding Arthur's grave, the monks and the crown effectively proclaimed that the once and future king was well and truly dead and would not be coming back to lead any revolts. The financial and political motives behind this discovery are glaringly obvious to modern historians, casting serious doubt on its authenticity. Yet, the identification was so powerful that it stuck, and Glastonbury has been synonymous with Avalon ever since. Geographical and archaeological evidence adds fascinating, complex layers to this story, even if it doesn't prove the existence of a mythical king. The Somerset Levels were, for centuries, a vast, shallow sea in the winter. Glastonbury Tor would have indeed appeared as a solitary island, accessible only by boat, perfectly matching the description of an isle of mystery. Furthermore, archaeological digs around Glastonbury have revealed that the area was a thriving center of population since the Iron Age and home to a uniquely ancient Christian community, potentially one of the earliest in Britain. This long history of human habitation and spiritual significance lends a certain credibility to the area's legendary status. It wasn't a random hill chosen by clever monks. It was a place already deeply steeped in myth and reverence, a fact the monks would have been well aware of and shrewdly capitalized upon. Today, Avalon has transcended its Arthurian origins to become a universal symbol. It represents a sanctuary for the wounded soul, a promise of healing and respite from the battles of life. It is the ultimate retreat, a place where time stands still and wounds, both physical and spiritual, can be mended. This evolution from a specific Celtic otherworld to a broad cultural metaphor speaks to a deep, enduring human need. We all long for our own Avalon, a peaceful haven where we can lay down our burdens and be made whole. The island's enduring power lies not in the historical truth of a king's grave, but in the timeless truth of that longing. It is a myth that assures us that such a place of rest exists, even if, like the morning mists around the Tor, it remains just out of reach. While the legends of Avalon and El Dorado spoke to a longing for healing or wealth within our known world, a different kind of myth captured the medieval European imagination, one that promised a powerful ally in a faraway land, a Christian king of unimaginable piety and wealth ruling over a kingdom of miracles. This was the legend of Prester John, a story that began not with a place but with a letter. In the mid-12th century, a mysterious document began to circulate among the courts of Europe, addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. It was from a man who called himself Presbyter Johannes Prester John. The title itself was a fascinating clue. Prester was a corruption of presbyter, meaning priest, signifying this was a man who was both a mighty king and a holy man. The contents of this letter were nothing short of breathtaking. Prester John described his kingdom as a terrestrial paradise located somewhere in the Orient beyond Persia and Armenia, a land overflowing with gold, jewels, and pepper. It was a realm where milk and honey flowed, but its true wonders were its marvels. The letter spoke of the fountain of youth, which restored youth to anyone who drank from it 3 times. It described a mysterious mirror through which every province of his kingdom could be seen. His palace was made of crystal, his table of emerald, and he was served by 72 kings. His court included monstrous races familiar from classical texts, men with horns and eyes on their shoulders, headless beings with faces on their chests, and giants and pygmies living side by side. But most importantly, he was a devout Nestorian Christian, and he commanded an army vast enough to reconquer the Holy Land from the Muslims and pave the way for a new Christian world order. For a Europe mired in the struggles of the Crusades, this letter was a seismic event. It offered a potent blend of hope and validation. The hope was that they were not alone in their faith. A powerful Christian brother existed beyond the Islamic world, ready to come to their aid. The validation was for their own worldview, which seamlessly merged Christian theology with the monstrous wonders described by ancient Roman naturalists like Pliny the Elder. The letter, almost certainly a clever forgery likely crafted by a Western cleric, was a perfect mirror of medieval European desires, fears, and limited geographical knowledge. It was so compelling that Pope Alexander III sent a personal physician as an emissary to find Prester John, though the man vanished without a trace, becoming one of the first of many victims of this seductive myth. As the decades passed and no kingdom was found in Central Asia, the supposed location of Prester John's realm began to shift on the map. When the Mongol Empire erupted onto the world stage in the 13th century, European powers initially hoped its great khans were the long-lost Christian kings. Explorers and missionaries like Marco Polo and William of Rubruck were sent east along the Silk Road, partly on diplomatic missions but also with instructions to seek out Prester John. Their travels dramatically expanded European knowledge of Asia, but they returned with reports of powerful Mongol rulers who were Buddhists, Muslims, or Tengrists, not Christians. This forced the legend to shift south. By the 14th and 15th centuries, with the rise of the Age of Discovery, the kingdom was firmly relocated to the mysterious and unexplored interior of Africa. Here, the myth finally found a tangible, though still elusive, anchor. Rumors and reports from travelers speaking of powerful Christian kingdoms in the highlands of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, began to reach Europe. The Ethiopian Empire was indeed an ancient and isolated Christian nation, with its own unique Orthodox traditions dating back to the 4th century. Its emperors, who traced their lineage back to the biblical union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, were known as powerful rulers. To European explorers and cartographers, this had to be it. Prester John had been found. The myth became so entrenched that maps of Africa from the 16th century often labeled the Ethiopian highlands as the Kingdom of Prester John. This belief directly drove exploration. Portuguese explorers like Pedro de Covilhã deliberately sought out the court of the Ethiopian emperor, believing they were finally making contact with the legendary priest king. They found a sophisticated Christian monarchy, but it was not the land of endless gold and mythical creatures described in the letter. The reality, while impressive, could never live up to the fantasy. The cultural impact of this centuries-long quest is profound. The relentless search for Prester John's kingdom was a primary engine behind the European exploration of both Asia and Africa. It pushed cartographers to refine their maps, fueled the ambitions of kings and popes, and sent countless men into the unknown. It represents a fascinating chapter in the history of cross-cultural misunderstanding, where a real, vibrant culture was viewed through the distorting lens of a Western fairy tale. The legend of Prester John is ultimately a story about the power of hope and the danger of projection. It shows how a desperate need for an ally, a deep desire to find a perfect, righteous kingdom in a fallen world, can create a myth so powerful it alters the course of history, sending ships over horizons and armies across deserts in pursuit of a reflection of their own deepest wishes. But the human imagination is a restless force, never content with the maps we have drawn or the histories we have written. If Atlantis was the archetypal lost continent of the Atlantic, then its Pacific and Indian Ocean counterparts were waiting in the wings, born not from ancient philosophy but from a startlingly modern source, 19th century science. Our next chronicle takes us to Lemuria, a lost world that began its life not in myth, but in a respected scientific journal. In 1864, a British zoologist named Philip Sclater was wrestling with a fascinating biogeographical puzzle. He had noted that the fossil record contained a particular species of lemur in both Madagascar and India, but nowhere else on the planet. The prevailing scientific theory of the time could not adequately explain how these primates could have crossed the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. Darwin's theory of evolution was still new, and the concepts of plate tectonics and continental drift were decades away from being accepted. So Sclater proposed an elegant, if entirely speculative, solution: a massive land bridge that once connected the two landmasses. In a paper published in the Quarterly Journal of Science, he named this lost continent Lemuria after the lemurs whose distribution it sought to explain. For a time, this theory was taken seriously within the scientific community. Other prominent figures, including the German biologist Ernst Haeckel, saw in Lemuria a potential answer to an even bigger question: the origin of humanity itself. Haeckel suggested this sunken continent could have been the cradle of humankind, the so-called paradise, where the missing link between apes and humans first evolved. His hypothetical primitive humans, which he called Pithecanthropus alalis, or speechless ape man, were placed on this lost land. This scientific endorsement, though later abandoned, gave Lemuria a powerful veneer of credibility that pure myth lacked. It was a ghost in the machine of Victorian science, a plausible phantom that captured the intellectual spirit of an age obsessed with classification, exploration, and finding grand, unifying theories for the natural world. But the story of Lemuria was about to take a dramatic and esoteric turn, leaping from the halls of academia into the realm of the occult. This transition was masterminded by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the charismatic and controversial co-founder of the Theosophical Society. In her seminal 1888 work, The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky wove Lemuria into an elaborate cosmological history of humanity. She described it not as a simple land bridge, but as a vast continent in the Indian Ocean, home to the third root race of humanity. Her Lemurians were bizarre, egg-laying giants with a third eye in the back of their heads and psychic abilities. They coexisted with dinosaurs and communicated through telepathy, as they had not yet developed speech. According to Blavatsky, this grotesque and spiritually primitive race was eventually superseded by the more advanced Atlanteans, and Lemuria itself met a catastrophic end, sinking beneath the waves in a cataclysm that spared only a few survivors. In her hands, a scientific hypothesis was transformed into a foundational pillar of a new spiritual movement, a lost world that explained the occult evolution of the human soul. This theosophical reinterpretation did not exist in a vacuum. It found a powerful and receptive audience in southern India, where it resonated deeply with ancient Tamil legends of a lost homeland called Kumari Kandam. These indigenous stories spoke of a vast territory south of the Indian peninsula, a sophisticated Tamil kingdom that was swallowed by the sea in a series of devastating floods. The Tamil revivalist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries eagerly merged these two narratives. They saw in Blavatsky's Lemuria a scientific validation of their own cultural myths. This fusion created a potent nationalist and cultural mythos. Kumari Kandam was Lemuria, and it was the birthplace of Tamil civilization, language, and culture, a golden age lost to the encroaching ocean. The loss of this continent explained the Tamil people's historical grievances and served as a symbol of their former greatness. This blending of Western esotericism with local tradition demonstrates the incredible malleability of lost continent myths, how they can be adopted and adapted to serve powerful cultural and political identities. The final chapter in the story of Lemuria, however, was written by the very field that gave it birth, science. The 20th century's greatest geological revelation, the theory of plate tectonics, provided the true explanation for the lemur fossil puzzle that had baffled Sclater. Around 120 million years ago, India, Madagascar, and Antarctica were all part of the same supercontinent, Gondwana. As Gondwana broke apart, India and Madagascar separated from Antarctica and from each other, drifting on tectonic plates to their current positions. The lemurs were simply passengers on these giant continental rafts. their distribution a fossilized record of a geological process, not a sunken land bridge. Sonar mapping of the Indian Ocean floor confirmed the truth. There was no evidence of a submerged continent. The scientific community had long since moved on, and Lemuria was relegated to the history books as a curious footnote, a theory that was innovative for its time but ultimately incorrect. Yet, its disappearance from scientific discourse did nothing to diminish its power in the popular imagination. Lemuria's enduring appeal lies in its unique origin story. Unlike Atlantis, which comes to us from ancient allegory, Lemuria feels modern and strangely credible because it was born from a scientific problem. This gives it a different kind of legitimacy in the world of alternative history and pseudo-archaeology. It represents a tantalizing what-if, a reminder that even established science can be wrong, and that the gaps in our knowledge are fertile ground for spectacular stories. The idea of a lost continent, whether in the Atlantic, Pacific, or Indian Ocean, fulfills a deep and abiding human need. It provides a blank space on the map where we can project our fantasies of utopia, our theories of ancient advanced races, and our longing for a forgotten golden age. These sunken lands are more than just places. They are psychological anchors for our collective nostalgia, symbols of all the knowledge and history that we fear has been irrevocably lost to time, waiting silently beneath the waves for us to rediscover. From the sunken continents of scientific speculation, we return now to a wonder firmly planted in the earth, an architectural marvel that seems to defy the very logic of its arid environment. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon stand as perhaps the most enigmatic of the seven wonders of the ancient world, a lush, terraced paradise said to have risen like a green mountain in the heart of the Mesopotamian desert. Our primary sources for this wonder are not the Babylonians themselves, but later Greek and Roman historians like Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Philo of Byzantium, who wrote centuries after the gardens were supposedly built. They tell a romantic story of a king's devotion, claiming the gardens were constructed by the mighty King Nebuchadnezzar II around 600 BC to comfort his homesick Median wife, Queen Amytis, who longed for the green, mountainous landscapes of her homeland. It's a beautiful, human tale of love conquering all, even nature itself. The descriptions from these ancient authors are incredibly detailed and vivid, which makes the subsequent mystery all the more baffling. They describe a grand, ascending series of vaulted terraces, built like a ziggurat, reaching heights of possibly 75 feet or more. These terraces were not merely planted with trees, but were a self-contained ecosystem. The soil was deep enough to support large trees, whose roots were protected by layers of reeds, bitumen, and lead sheeting to prevent moisture from the intricate irrigation system from damaging the structure. That irrigation system was the true marvel, a mechanical feat that must have seemed like magic. Greek accounts describe a complex arrangement of screws, pumps, and cisterns, likely staffed by a dedicated crew of slaves, hauling water from the nearby Euphrates River all the way to the very top of the structure, allowing it to cascade down through the gardens in a series of cooling waterfalls and streams. The image is staggering, a man-made mountain of greenery, shimmering with water and vibrant with the colors of exotic flowers and fruits, standing in stark, impossible contrast to the flat, sun-baked plains of Babylon. And yet, despite these rich descriptions, a glaring problem has confronted archaeologists for over a century. There is no definitive physical evidence for the Hanging Gardens in Babylon. Extensive excavations at the site, including those led by the renowned German archaeologist Robert Koldewey in the early 20th century, have uncovered incredible finds. They found the Great Ishtar Gate, the processional way, and the foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's immense palace. Koldewey did uncover a curious structure with an elaborate well system and vaulted chambers near the palace, which he excitedly proposed was the foundation of the gardens. However, most modern scholars are skeptical. the location doesn't perfectly align with the classical sources, and no definitive inscriptions linking Nebuchadnezzar to such a garden have ever been found in the vast trove of cuneiform tablets recovered from the city. This absence is deafening. The Babylonians were meticulous record keepers. Nebuchadnezzar left behind inscriptions detailing his every construction project from city walls to temples. Why would his most spectacular achievement, a wonder meant to showcase his power and ingenuity, go entirely unmentioned? This evidential void has led to a compelling and now widely debated theory. What if the Greek historians, writing centuries later and from a great distance, simply got the location wrong? The most prominent alternative theory comes from Dr. Stephanie Daly, an Assyriologist from the University of Oxford. After decades of studying cuneiform texts, she presents a fascinating case that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but were built a century earlier and 300 miles to the north in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh by the king Sennacherib. Her evidence is multifaceted and striking. Sennacherib, who ruled from 704 to 681 BC, left behind extensive inscriptions boasting of his own great palace and the technological marvels he created for it. He describes a massive aqueduct system built to bring water to the city from over 50 miles away, an engineering project of staggering ambition. Most crucially, he wrote of a lavish palace garden, and in one key inscription, he describes a water-raising screw made of bronze, an innovation he claimed was a new invention, a technology that matches the mechanics described by the Greeks for the Hanging Gardens. Furthermore, later carvings from Nineveh depict lush, terraced gardens watering a royal park filled with trees, hanging vines, and pavilions. The case for Sennacherib is not just about technology, it's also about translation and the fog of time. Dr. Daly suggests that when the Assyrian Empire fell and Nineveh was sacked, the region later became part of the Babylonian Empire. The conquering Persians and later the Greeks who heard these stories may have simply conflated the two great capitals, attributing the legendary gardens of the north to the more famous southern city of Babylon, the name that would have been far more familiar to them. It's a classic case of a story migrating to a more famous location over centuries of retelling. If this theory is correct, it doesn't diminish the wonder, it simply relocates it to a different king, one whose own inscriptions and engineering projects provide a startlingly plausible blueprint for the legendary gardens. Whether the gardens were in Babylon, Nineveh, or existed only in the minds of awe-struck travelers, they stand as a powerful testament to ancient human ingenuity. The very concept was an act of defiance against nature, a declaration that a powerful ruler could command not just people but the elements themselves. To create a green oasis in the desert was the ultimate display of wealth, power, and technological mastery. It symbolized a king's ability to create a microcosm of the entire world, collecting plants and animals from every corner of his empire to showcase his dominion over them. This desire to construct an earthly paradise, a controlled and perfect nature, is a theme that runs through history from the royal gardens of Versailles to the modern botanical garden. The Hanging Gardens represent the primal, enduring human urge to reshape our environment, to impose order and beauty upon the wild, and to create a sanctuary of peace and abundance. Their elusive nature only heightens their power. They are the ultimate symbol of a dream that may have been real, a breathtaking ambition that lives on precisely because it speaks to something timeless in our spirit, the belief that with enough will and creativity we can indeed make the desert bloom. While the sprawling, sunken continent of Lemuria captured the scientific and occult imagination, the coast of Cornwall in England holds a much more intimate and poignant legend of the lost land of Lyonesse. This is not a story of global cataclysm or advanced races, but a deeply local tale woven into the very identity of a people, a haunting memory of a kingdom that now lies silent beneath the waves of the Celtic Sea. In Arthurian romance, Lyonesse is often portrayed as the homeland of the tragic hero Sir Tristan, the noble knight whose ill-fated love for the Irish Princess Iseult forms one of the cycle's most powerful and enduring stories. It was from this fertile land that Tristan embarked on his fateful journey, and in some versions of the tale, it was to this land that the doomed lovers briefly escaped, finding sanctuary in its forests before the outside world tore them apart. The land itself becomes a character in the tragedy, a beautiful, peaceful realm that shared the fate of its most famous son, destined for a watery grave. The descriptions of Lyonesse paint a picture of a place of almost mythical abundance. It was said to be a low-lying plain, dotted with 140 prosperous villages, lush fields perfect for grazing, and a grand city at its heart. The land was protected by a series of causeways and a single towering cliff that served as its gateway to the rest of Cornwall. The legend of its end is a classic folkloric motif. A great storm, summoned by divine wrath or perhaps mere geological inevitability, gathered over the sea. The waves rose higher and higher, overwhelming the defensive walls and dikes. The waters rushed in, swallowing villages, churches, and farms in a single terrifying night. Only one man on a white horse was said to have escaped, galloping ahead of the surging flood to reach the high ground of Cornwall, leaving everything and everyone else to be consumed. This lone survivor tale echoes other flood myths from around the world, a powerful human-scale account of a disaster that erases an entire world. What makes Lyonesse so compelling and sets it apart from more speculative lost lands is the tangible geological evidence that supports the kernel of truth behind the story. The region between the westernmost tip of Cornwall, Land's End, and the Isles of Scilly, about 28 miles offshore, is known as the Celtic Sea. This area, once called the Lost Hundred or Lethau So in Cornish, is remarkably shallow. For a trained geologist or archaeologist, this is a telltale sign of a drowned landscape. During the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower, this entire area was not sea at all, but a vast, exposed coastal plain. It was a continuation of the Cornish peninsula, a land bridge connecting what is now the mainland to the high points that today form the Scilly Isles. This was a real, habitable landscape with forests, rivers, and hills. This isn't just theoretical. At extremely low tides, particularly after winter storms have scoured the seabed, tangible evidence of this lost world is revealed. The stumps of ancient, petrified oak and pine forests become visible off the coasts of Cornwall and on the shores of the Scilly Isles. Peat beds containing the nuts, leaves, and even the footprints of the people and animals who once lived there have been excavated. Even more strikingly, archaeologists diving in the area have found the remains of human habitation, stone walls, field boundaries, and primitive hearths, all now lying on the ocean floor. These aren't the grand palaces of a mythical Arthurian kingdom, but they are something perhaps more powerful. The ordinary homes and farms of real Bronze Age people who lived on land that is now irrevocably lost to the sea. The sinking of this land was not a single catastrophic event as the legend suggests, but a slow, relentless process that unfolded over millennia. As the ice sheets melted at the end of the last glacial period, sea levels rose steadily, gradually inundating the low-lying plain. Occasional, more dramatic events would have accelerated the process. The area is geologically active, and major earthquakes or underwater landslides, like the one believed to have caused a massive tsunami in the Bristol Channel around 1600 BC, could have caused sudden, catastrophic flooding that would have been burned into the collective memory of the surviving coastal communities. The legend of Lyonesse is a perfect example of how oral traditions can preserve the memory of real geological events for thousands of years, dressing them in the more dramatic and morally charged garb of myth. This pattern is not unique to Cornwall. From the Welsh legends of Cantre Gwaelod, a kingdom drowned by a negligent well maiden, to the Breton tales of the sunken city of Wise, coastal communities across the Celtic world share these stories. They serve multiple purposes. On one level, they are etiological myths, providing an explanation for the submerged forests and ruins that fishermen would occasionally snag their nets on or that were visible at the lowest tides. On another, deeper level, they function as powerful moral parables. The flooding is often attributed to human failings, a king's pride, a saint's curse, or a community's sin, serving as a timeless warning about the consequences of hubris and the fragility of human endeavors in the face of nature's immense power. Lyonesse, therefore, is more than just a sunken land. It is a cultural touchstone, a story that connects the people of Cornwall to their landscape and their past in a profound and melancholy way, a permanent reminder that the map beneath the waves is just as important as the one we see on the surface. But our journey through the realms of the afterlife now takes us from the drowned coastlines of Celtic Britain to the sun-drenched shores of ancient Greece, to a paradise that promised not just an escape from suffering, but eternal bliss for the chosen few. This is the Elysian Fields, or Elysium, a concept that has shaped Western ideas of heaven for millennia. Our earliest glimpse comes from Homer's Odyssey, written in the 8th or 7th century BC, where it is described not as a universal destination for the good, but as a very exclusive retirement community for the relatives of the gods. The prophet Menelaus is told by the sea god Proteus that he will not die, but will be sent to the Elysian plain at the ends of the earth, where life is easiest for men. There is no snow, no winter, no storm, only the gentle ocean breezes that constantly refresh the island. This was a privilege reserved for a handful of demigods and favorites of Zeus, a peaceful, painless existence in a faraway land that was geographically part of the world, yet utterly separate from its hardships. Within a few centuries, the concept began to democratize and evolve, expanding its membership criteria. The poet Hesiod, in his Works and Days, introduces the Islands of the Blessed, a very similar paradise, but now open to the heroes of the mythic past, the fourth race of men who fought at Thebes and Troy. After death, they are whisked away by Zeus to live a life of ease beside the deep, swirling ocean, with 3 harvests a year provided by the grateful earth. This shift is crucial. It moves the reward from a matter of divine bloodline to one of heroic virtue and action. By the time of the famous Athenian playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides in the 5th century BC, the idea had evolved further, influenced by the growing popularity of mystery cults like the Eleusinian Mysteries, which promised initiates a better lot in the afterlife. Elysium began to be seen less as a physical place on the edge of the map and more as a blessed sector within the underworld itself, a special section of Hades reserved for the virtuous, the initiated, and the righteous. This evolution reached its most detailed and influential form with the Roman poet Virgil in the 1st century BC. In his epic, the Aeneid, he provides a breathtaking guided tour of the underworld, where his hero Aeneas descends to meet the spirit of his father. Virgil's Elysium is a lush, green landscape of fragrant groves and sunny meadows, inhabited by spirits who spend their eternity exercising, wrestling, dancing, and singing. Most importantly, Virgil introduces a concept that would have a profound impact on later Christian thought, the river Lethe. The souls in Elysium are those destined to be reincarnated, and before they return to the world above, they must drink from this river of forgetfulness to erase the memories of their past lives. This vision of Elysium is no longer just a static reward. It's part of a complex cosmic cycle of purification and rebirth, a temporary paradise on the path to a new beginning. Understanding what the average ancient Greek actually believed about the afterlife, however, requires looking beyond the epic poetry of the elite. The evidence from pottery, grave goods, and epitaphs paints a more complex and often darker picture. For most, the common belief was in a shadowy, joyless existence in the realm of Hades, a place of forgetfulness rather than punishment. This is vividly depicted on countless white-ground lekythoi, or oil jars, placed in tombs which show the god Hermes gently leading the frail, ghostly shade of the deceased to the ferryman Charon for the journey across the river Styx. The fact that families placed coins in the mouths of the dead to pay Charon's fee is well attested archaeologically, proving how deeply this belief was held across all social classes. This was the expected fate for nearly everyone. Against this bleak backdrop, the promise of Elysium would have shone like a brilliant star. It represented a spectacular exception to the rule, a hope for something far better that was attainable only through extraordinary means, divine favor, legendary heroism, or initiation into secret religious rites that offered a different path. The cultural and philosophical legacy of Elysium is immense. When the Romans adopted and refined the concept, they passed it directly into the bloodstream of Western culture. The Roman poets, with Virgil at the forefront, essentially provided a pagan blueprint for paradise, a green, peaceful, joyful realm where the good are rewarded. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, its theologians were tasked with constructing a compelling vision of heaven to convert a pagan population. They found a ready-made framework in the Elysian fields, the classical imagery of a luminous, peaceful afterlife populated by blessed souls seamlessly merged with Christian teachings of resurrection and salvation. The pagan paradise for heroes became the Christian heaven for the saved. This was not a case of mere copying, but a powerful cultural synthesis where a deeply ingrained classical ideal was purified and sanctified to serve a new faith. The human yearning that Elysium represented was so potent that it transcended its mythological origins, providing the emotional and imaginative vocabulary for the heaven that billions believe in today. Ultimately, the Elysian fields stand as one of humanity's most enduring and influential ideas because it speaks to our deepest desire for justice, the hope that a life of struggle, virtue, or faith will not end in darkness but in light, that our final destination is not a dusty, forgotten hall, but a sunlit meadow where the air is always sweet and rest is truly earned. Leaving behind the mythical paradises and sunken kingdoms of the old world, our journey now carries us across the Atlantic to a new continent, where the desperate hunger for gold would conjure another shimmering mirage in the harsh desert sun. The legend of the Seven Cities of Cíbola is a uniquely American folktale, born from a potent cocktail of survivors' guilt, cultural misunderstanding, and the unquenchable avarice of the Spanish Empire. Its origins can be traced to a single, catastrophic event in 1528, the disastrous expedition of Panfilo de Narvaez to colonize Florida. Of the 600 men who landed, only 4 survived years of starvation, disease, and shipwreck, finally washing up on the shores of what is now Texas. Among these few was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, whose account of their 8-year odyssey walking across the continent would become a sensational bestseller in Europe. But the true seed of the Cíbola myth was planted by another survivor, a black Moroccan slave named Estevanico. As these 4 ragged men journeyed west, they encountered numerous indigenous communities. To secure safe passage and food, they often presented themselves as powerful healers. Estevanico, in particular, with his striking appearance and charismatic manner, became a renowned figure. It was during these travels that they began to hear tantalizing stories from various tribes about great cities lying far to the north, cities built of stone and possessed of immense wealth. The Spaniards, their minds conditioned by the plunder of the Aztec and Inca empires, naturally interpreted these stories through the lens of gold. They believed they were hearing confirmation of another rich civilization waiting to be conquered. When the 4 survivors finally stumbled into a Spanish slave hunting outpost in present-day Mexico in 1536, they brought with them these incredible rumors which quickly spread like wildfire. The most eager listener was the Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza. He immediately dispatched a Franciscan friar, Marcos de Niza, on a reconnaissance mission to verify the stories, with the invaluable Estevanico acting as his guide and scout. Friar Marcos's subsequent report is a masterpiece of ambiguity and hopeful exaggeration. He sent Estevanico ahead to scout, instructing him to send back a small cross if he found a modest village and a large cross if he found something truly significant. The story goes that Estevanico eventually sent back a cross as large as a man, a signal that he had found a discovery of monumental importance. According to the friar's later account, he himself crested a hill and saw, from a great distance, a city larger and grander than Mexico City, shimmering in the sun. He claimed it was undoubtedly one of the legendary Seven Cities. However, the truth was far darker. Estevanico had actually reached the Zuni pueblo of Huaca. His manner, which involved wearing bells and feathers and claiming to be a great healer and the son of the sun, alarmed the Zuni leaders. They saw him not as a herald but as a threat, and they killed him. Friar Marcos, hearing of this, likely only glimpsed the pueblo from a safe distance and, terrified, retreated to Mexico to weave his fabulous tale, transforming a multi-storied adobe complex glowing in the afternoon light into a city of gold. That single report was all the confirmation the viceroy needed. In 1540, he launched the most ambitious expedition into the North American interior the continent had yet seen. He placed a young, ambitious nobleman, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, in command of a massive force, over 300 Spanish soldiers, hundreds of indigenous Mexican allies, scores of priests, and a vast herd of livestock, a traveling army fueled by the promise of limitless wealth. Coronado's journey was one of extreme hardship, crossing brutal deserts and endless grasslands, all sustained by the dream of those seven cities. When they finally reached Huaca, the reality was a devastating anticlimax. Instead of a golden metropolis, they found a fortified pueblo of sun-baked earth. The Zuni warriors, seeing this armed host approaching, defended their home. The Spanish, enraged by the disparity between the fantasy and the reality, brutally stormed the village. There was no gold, no jewels, only stored food and simple pottery. The great treasure of Cíbola was corn, but the myth was a stubborn parasite, and rather than admit total failure, Coronado clung to its fading hope. He spent the next 2 years wandering the vast American Southwest, his expedition fracturing into smaller groups. They became the first Europeans to see the Grand Canyon, to cross the endless Texas Panhandle, and to encounter the nomadic bison hunting tribes of the Great Plains. They even heard a new story from a captured Pawnee man they called El Turco, the Turk, who spoke of a fabulously wealthy land called Quivira farther to the east. This led Coronado on another wild goose chase across the plains, only to find a simple village of grass huts in modern-day Kansas. The entire venture was a catastrophic financial failure. Coronado returned to Mexico in disgrace, bankrupt and broken, his reputation in tatters for having found nothing but humps of earth and skins of cattle. The true legacy of the Seven Cities of Cíbola lies not in what was found, but in what was set in motion. The myth, born from a desperate misinterpretation, forced open the door to the American Southwest for European exploration. The detailed accounts from members of Coronado's expedition provide the first written ethnographic records of the Puebloan peoples, the Apache, and the myriad cultures of the plains. Yet this discovery came at an immense and tragic cost for those indigenous communities. The Spanish arrival introduced new diseases that would devastate populations, and the demand for food and supplies to sustain the massive expedition placed a terrible burden on the resources of the villages they encountered. Most importantly, it marked the beginning of centuries of colonial pressure, missionization, and cultural disruption that would forever alter the way of life for the peoples of the region. The Seven Cities of Cíbola stand as a powerful monument to the destructive power of avarice, a warning that when we insist on hearing only what we want to hear, we become blind to the truth and beauty of the world that actually exists right in front of us. Now we turn our gaze from the scorching American deserts to the very top of the world, to a land of eternal sunshine and perfect peace that the ancient Greeks believed lay hidden beyond the realm of ice and cold. This is Hyperborea, a name that literally means beyond the north wind. In the classical imagination, the north wind, personified as the god Boreas, was a bitter and violent force that brought winter's chill down upon Greece. But the poets and philosophers proposed that if one could travel past his inhospitable domain, they would discover a paradise untouched by his icy breath. Unlike the underworld realms or sunken continents, Hyperborea was not a land of the dead, but a terrestrial utopia, a place of perfection that existed here on Earth, yet was forever inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Our earliest sources, like the historian Herodotus, weave a fascinating picture of this idyllic realm. They described it as a circular continent, a concept that mirrors the Greek ideal of geometric perfection. In this blessed land, the sun was said to shine for 24 hours a day, a clear description of the Arctic midnight sun. The climate was eternally spring-like, yielding 2 bountiful harvests every year. The Hyperboreans themselves were said to live for 1,000 years in a state of pure bliss, free from war, hard labor, disease, and the ravages of old age. When they eventually grew weary of their perfect existence, they simply chose to end their lives by leaping joyfully from a certain cliff into the sea. This was not a tragedy, but the ultimate expression of control over one's own destiny. Their society was one of effortless abundance and perpetual peace, a stark contrast to the often harsh and unpredictable life in the ancient Mediterranean. This paradise was intimately tied to the sun god Apollo. Greek myth held that Apollo would travel to Hyperborea in his chariot each winter, explaining his seasonal absence from the skies over Greece. The Hyperboreans were considered his favorite people, a race of priests and poets who worshipped him with continuous song and dance. The myths even describe a mysterious route by which offerings were passed from Hyperborea to the sacred island of Delos, Apollo's legendary birthplace. These offerings, wrapped in wheat straw, were said to be handed from one mysterious northern tribe to another in a relay that stretched across the known world, a testament to the deep and sacred connection the Greeks felt to this distant, unseen land. So where did this idea come from? It is highly unlikely that any ancient Greek ever actually visited the Arctic Circle. Instead, scholars believe the myth was born from a combination of travelers' tales and clever deduction. Greek traders traveling the Black Sea would have encountered nomadic Scythian tribes, and from them heard incredible stories of even more distant lands to the far north. The Greeks knew that the further north one traveled in their own world, the longer the summer days became. It was a small, logical leap for their brilliant minds to imagine that at the extreme northern edge of the world, the sun might never set at all. Furthermore, amber, that beautiful golden stone that washed up on northern European shores, was highly prized in Greece. They knew it came from the north, and its warm, sun-like glow may have contributed to the idea of a sun-drenched paradise at the top of the world. Hyperborea was in many ways a scientific hypothesis, an attempt to explain the natural world through myth and reason. The myth's journey into the modern era is a dark and troubling one, a stark example of how an ancient ideal can be twisted to serve malignant ideologies. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Hyperborea was seized upon by occultists and racial theorists. Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy placed it as the home of the first root race in her elaborate cosmology. This esoteric interest was then horrifically co-opted by Nazi mystics within the Ononub, the SS's research division dedicated to proving Aryan supremacy. They latched onto the idea of Hyperborea as the primordial homeland of the Aryan race, a superhuman, blonde-haired, blue-eyed utopia from which they had supposedly migrated south. This pseudo-scientific fantasy fueled expeditions to places like Sweden and the Karelian region of Finland, where Nazis desperately searched for any geological or archaeological evidence to support their racist mythology, attempting to weaponize our ancient Greek paradise for their own genocidal ends. Ultimately, the enduring power of Hyperborea lies not in any potential geographical coordinates, but in its profound psychological resonance. It represents the ultimate expression of a universal human impulse to project our ideals of perfection onto the blank spaces of the map. It is the dream of a world without struggle, a place where the environment is perfectly hospitable, food is abundant, life is long, and death is a gentle choice rather than a terrifying inevitability. Every culture has its version of this, from Shangri-La to the Fortunate Isles. Hyperborea is the classical world's contribution to this deep-seated yearning. It is the belief that somewhere, just beyond the known, beyond the harsh winds of our present reality, there exists a land of pure, unchanging light waiting for us to find it. Following the frigid fantasies of Hyperborea, our quest for northern utopias takes a decisive turn from ancient Greek speculation to a very real and consequential chapter in the age of exploration, one that would irrevocably shape the map of North America. This brings us to the enigmatic kingdom of Cíbola, a legend born not from poetry but from the tense, high-stakes dialogue between a French explorer and his captive. The year was 1535, and the French navigator Jacques Cartier was on his second voyage to the New World, intent on finding a passage to Asia and, failing that, discovering sources of wealth to rival Spain's conquests. While exploring the mighty St. Lawrence River, he encountered the Iroquois village of Stadacona near present-day Quebec City. Its leader was Chief Donnacona. In a move that would set the entire saga in motion, Cartier, perhaps distrustful or simply ambitious, made the fateful decision to seize Donnacona, his two sons, and several other tribespeople, intending to take them back to France as proof of his discoveries and as potential translators for future voyages. It was during his captivity in France, a place utterly alien to him, that Donnacona began to tell Cartier extraordinary stories. He spoke of a fabulously wealthy kingdom called Cíbola, located far to the northwest of Stadacona, up a great river that bore the same name. This was not just a rich village, it was a realm of immense scale and splendor. Donnacona described cities encircled by high walls, people who dressed in woolens like Europeans and possessed great quantities of gold, rubies, and other precious metals. Most intriguingly, he spoke of a race of fair-skinned, blonde-haired people who lived there, a detail that would have struck a powerful chord with the French. These tales were not offered freely. They were likely a strategic performance by a shrewd leader in an impossible situation. Donnacona, held captive thousands of miles from home, was using the only currency he had, information. His stories were probably a blend of distant tribal lore, travelers' tales, and his own invention, designed to make himself invaluable to his captors, to promise a prize so great that they would have to return him to his homeland to find it. For Cartier and his patron, King Francis I of France, these accounts were catnip to their colonial ambitions. They were desperate to find their own Mexico or Peru, and here was a native chief seemingly giving them directions to one. The descriptions of blonde-haired people triggered immediate speculation about a lost Welsh prince, or more plausibly, descendants of Norse settlers from Greenland and Vinland. Norse explorers like Leif Erikson had indeed reached parts of Canada around the year 1000, establishing a small, short-lived settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. Could distant, garbled memories of these visitors have filtered down through indigenous trade networks over 500 years, transforming into the legend of an entire kingdom of white men living in the interior? It's a tantalizing possibility, though the vast distance between Newfoundland and the Saguenay River region makes a direct connection difficult to prove. More likely, Donnacona's mention of light-skinned people referred to members of his own or neighboring tribes who might have had lighter hair or vitiligo, a condition that causes loss of skin pigmentation, interpreted through Cartier's hopeful and eager lens. Driven by these stories, Cartier embarked on a third voyage in 1541, this time with a specific mandate to find the kingdom of Cíbola. He had Donnacona's now bereaved sons as guides, though their motivation to lead the French on a wild goose chase into unknown territory away from their own people remains a subject of debate. The expedition pushed up the Saguenay River, a deep, dramatic fjord carved by glaciers, but they found no walled cities, no mines of gold, only the rugged Canadian shield and increasingly wary indigenous communities. The quest ended in hardship, disappointment, and the bitter cold of a Canadian winter, forcing Cartier to return to France empty-handed. The kingdom had evaporated into the northern mist, another phantom swallowed by the vastness of the continent. The legacy of the Kingdom of Saguenay is a profound lesson in the dynamics of cross-cultural misunderstanding during the colonial era. It stands as a classic example of what scholars call a phantasm, a mirage of wealth projected by Europeans onto the American landscape, built from a foundation of their own greed and the strategic storytelling of native informants. Donnacona was not simply lying, he was operating within a cultural framework where storytelling, hyperbole, and the strategic giving of gifts including stories were tools of diplomacy and survival. The French, however, heard only literal truths that aligned with their material desires. This tragicomic episode did more than just waste French resources. It directly fueled their continued exploration and eventual colonization of the Canadian interior. The dream of Saguenay, though never realized, drew them deeper into the continent, changing the course of history for the Iroquois, the French, and all the peoples of the region. It reminds us that the maps of the past were often drawn not just by surveyors, but by the potent and often dangerous interplay between what one person hopes to find and what another chooses to say. But if the search for El Dorado was a collective fever dream that consumed entire armies, the story of the lost city of Z is that of a single, unshakable obsession that would ultimately claim one man's life and forge a mystery that endures to this day. This is the tale of Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett, a British artillery officer, mapmaker, and explorer who represented the last gasp of the Old World adventurer, a man who stepped into the green darkness of the Amazon and never returned, taking his secret with him. Fawcett was no amateur. He was a seasoned frontiersman employed by the Royal Geographical Society in the early 20th century to chart the contested borders of Bolivia, Brazil, and Peru. He was famously resilient, possessing an almost superhuman tolerance for hardship, and he held a profound, if complex, respect for the indigenous peoples he encountered, often relying on their knowledge for survival where other explorers had failed. It was during these grueling surveying missions that Fawcett began to piece together a theory that would become his life's work. He discovered ancient pottery shards in unlikely places and heard persistent legends from various tribes about a lost stone city deep in the unexplored regions of the Mato Grosso. He became convinced that the Amazon, long dismissed by academics as a green hell incapable of supporting complex civilization, had once been home to a sophisticated, ancient culture. He dubbed this putative metropolis simply Z. His belief was fueled by a mysterious document known as Manuscript 512, housed in the National Library of Rio de Janeiro. This 18th century report described a party of Portuguese bandeirantes, or explorers, who claimed to have found a ruined city with grand arches, hieroglyphs, and a statue of a man pointing toward the north. For Fawcett, this wasn't just a tall tale, it was a treasure map. In 1925, after years of fundraising and planning, Fawcett embarked on his final, definitive expedition to find Z. His party was intentionally small, consisting only of his devoted eldest son, Jack, and Jack's best friend, Raleigh Rimmel. Fawcett believed a large, cumbersome team would attract unwanted attention and doom the mission. He was famously secretive about his intended route, fearful another might beat him to the prize. His last known communication was dispatched from a remote outpost called Dead Horse Camp, where he stated confidently, "We hope to get through this region in a few days. You need have no fear of any failure. After that silence, the three men vanished into the vastness of the upper Xingu River basin, swallowed by the jungle without a trace. Their disappearance triggered one of the most extensive manhunts in exploration history. Over the next century, more than 100 expeditions, fueled by sensationalized newspaper reports and the romantic allure of the story, ventured into the Amazon to find them. At least 100 would-be rescuers themselves died from disease, animal attacks, or at the hands of hostile tribes, adding to the grim toll of the Fawcett mystery. Theories about their fate blossomed wildly. Had they been killed by the notoriously aggressive Kalapalo people? Had they succumbed to starvation or disease? Or had Fawcett, in a final break with reality, gone native, establishing a new life as the white god of a remote tribe? Every few decades, a new clue would surface: a skeleton, a compass, a tale from an aging tribesman. But nothing provided conclusive proof. The mystery itself became the legend, far eclipsing the city Fawcett had sought. For decades, mainstream archaeology dismissed Fawcett as a deluded eccentric, a man chasing a mirage in a landscape that could never have supported the kind of grand, stone-built city he envisioned. The prevailing green hell theory held that the poor Amazonian soil could only ever have sustained small, nomadic tribes. But in a stunning twist of fate, 21st century science has begun to vindicate the core of Fawcett's belief, if not his specific vision. The revolutionary use of LiDAR technology, which can digitally deforest the landscape from the air, has revealed something astonishing. Across the Amazon basin, particularly in the very region Fawcett was exploring, researchers have found overwhelming evidence of large, complex, and sophisticated pre-Columbian societies. They have discovered networks of roads, moats, geoglyphs, and immense earthworks. Most notably, near the upper Xingu River, archaeologists like Michael Heckenberger have extensively studied the Kuakugu site, a complex of 20 towns and villages that may have supported a population of up to 50,000 people. These weren't cities of stone, as Fawcett imagined from European and Mesoamerican models, but magnificent garden cities of wood, earth, and palm thatch, connected by causeways and bridges and surrounded by defensive ditches and palisades. They practiced advanced agroforestry, cultivated the land sustainably, and their society was every bit as complex and organized as Fawcett had dreamed. The legends he heard were likely faded memories of these very real and very impressive civilizations that were decimated by European diseases that raced ahead of the explorers themselves, leaving the jungle to reclaim their works. So, did Percy Fawcett find his lost city? We will almost certainly never know. The enduring power of his story lies in its tragic irony. He was a man whose fundamental theory, that the Amazon hid a forgotten advanced culture, was ultimately proven correct by the very scientific establishment that mocked him. Yet his 19th century romanticism, his search for a single, monolithic Z, may have blinded him to the more distributed, organic complexity of the civilizations that were actually there. His fate remains the ultimate explorer's mystery, a blank space on the map that represents the final, impenetrable frontier between human ambition and the immense, unknowable power of the wild. He became a permanent part of the Amazon's mythology, a ghost forever wandering in search of a truth that now, finally, begins to emerge from the shadows without him. While the Greeks looked to Hyperborea as a land beyond the north wind, their world had another, more tangible, northernmost landmark, a place not of pure myth but of the very edge of the map. This was Thule, a name that first appears not in poetry, but in the pragmatic account of a Greek explorer named Pytheas of Massalia. Around 320 BC, this daring navigator embarked on an incredible voyage from the Mediterranean, sailing past the Pillars of Hercules and up the Atlantic coast of Europe. His own written account on the ocean has been lost to time, but later Roman scholars like Polybius and Strabo quoted him, often with a heavy dose of skepticism. Pytheas reported reaching a land he called Thule, a 6-day sail north of Britain, where the sea became a strange, slushy consistency he called the lung of the sea, likely a description of pack ice or sea ice. He wrote of a place where the sun barely set in summer and the night seemed to vanish, a clear observation of the Arctic midnight sun. For the pragmatic, Mediterranean-centered Romans, this account sounded so fantastical that many dismissed Pythias as an outright liar, yet his descriptions hold up as the first recorded encounter with the Arctic Circle's extreme environment. The genius and the ambiguity of Pythias's report lie in its geographical vagueness. He gave just enough detail to confirm the reality of such a northern place, but not enough to pinpoint it with modern certainty. This has turned the identification of ancient Thule into a long-running scholarly debate, with compelling cases made for several locations. The Shetland Islands are a strong candidate, being a reasonable 6-day sail from northern Scotland. Others argue for the coast of Norway with its dramatic fjords. The most famous and likely contender, however, is Iceland. Its dramatic volcanic landscape, its position relative to Britain, and the fact that it was the last major habitable landmass in the North Atlantic before Greenland, all align perfectly with Pythias's description of the ultimate northern frontier. The Romans, who never ventured so far themselves, adopted the name Ultima Thule, the farthest Thule, to mean the absolute boundary of the known world, the final outpost before the realm of legend and monsters began. This classical concept of a remote, almost mythical land at the edge of the map lay dormant for centuries, but was shockingly resurrected and grotesquely twisted in the early 20th century. In the ferment of German occultism and Volkisch nationalism that followed the First World War, a man named Rudolf von Sebetendorf founded the Thule Society in Munich in 1918. This secretive group, steeped in Ariosophy, a racist occult philosophy that sought the origins of the Aryan race, seized upon the name. For them, Thule was no longer a real place visited by a Greek explorer. It was the lost polar homeland of the Hyperboreans, a mythical cradle of the Aryan people whom they believed had migrated south, bringing their advanced civilization with them. The Thule Society's emblem, a long dagger superimposed on a swastika, makes its sinister legacy unmistakably clear. Many of its members, including Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg, would become key figures in the nascent Nazi Party, transferring their esoteric beliefs about a pure Aryan origin into the deadly racial politics of the Third Reich. The real, explorable Thule of Pythias had been completely subsumed by a dangerous fantasy of racial purity and supremacy, a chilling example of how ancient geography could be weaponized by modern hatred. Amidst this dark mythological hijacking, the real-world search for the geographical Thule never ceased. Viking explorers, the true heirs to Pythias's intrepid spirit, were likely the next to reach and settle these northern lands, though they called them by different names. In a fascinating linguistic echo, the name Thule found a new, permanent home in the far north when Danish explorer Knud Rasmussen established a trading post in northwestern Greenland in 1910. He named it Thule, now known as Karnak, as a deliberate nod to the ancient concept of the northernmost settlement. This place, one of the northernmost communities in the world, inhabited by the Inuit people, is the literal embodiment of Ultima Thule in the modern era, a real, living community on the edge of the vast Arctic wilderness, not a symbol of racial nonsense but a testament to human resilience and adaptation. The enduring power of Thule's myth, from its honest origins to its malignant distortion and its eventual redemption as a real place on the map, speaks to a fundamental human drive. It represents our innate fascination with the very concept of a frontier, that final line on the chart beyond which lies only the unknown. It is the geographical expression of our desire to find the last of anything, the last place, the last frontier, the ultimate challenge. Thule is the point on the horizon that we cannot see past, and in that obscurity we project our greatest hopes and our darkest fears. It can be a beacon for genuine exploration and discovery, as it was for Pythias, or it can become a blank screen for ideological fantasies, as it did for the Nazis. Its story is a powerful reminder that the edges of our maps are not just physical places, but psychological ones, and what we choose to find there reveals far more about us than it does about the land itself. From the ice and ideology of Thule, we now venture into the searing sands of the Arabian Peninsula, to a legend of such staggering opulence and divine retribution that its very existence was doubted for centuries. This is the story of Aram of the Pillars, a dazzling metropolis lost to the dunes and to time, remembered now only as a stark warning whispered on the desert wind. Our primary source for this chronicle is not a Greek historian or a medieval romance, but the Quran itself. In Surah Al-Fajr, the sacred text makes a fleeting, haunting reference. Have you not considered how your Lord dealt with Od, the people of Aram who had lofty pillars, the likes of whom had never been created in the lands? This single, enigmatic verse, revealed in the 7th century, ignited the imagination of the entire Islamic world. It spoke of a people, the tribe of Ad, who had reached a zenith of power and architectural achievement, building a city of unprecedented grandeur, only to be utterly obliterated by God for their arrogance and disbelief. To understand the weight of this story, we must step back into the world of pre-Islamic Arabia, a place alive with oral poetry and tribal lore. The Ad were not an invention of the Quran. They were a foundational part of the region's cultural memory, often mentioned alongside other vanished tribes like Thamud. Bedouin storytellers spoke of them as a race of giants, possessors of immense strength and longevity, who had conquered the deserts and built a civilization of legendary prosperity. Their king, a figure known as Shaddad ibn Ad, is central to the expanded folklore. It is said he grew so proud that he sought to rival paradise itself. Upon hearing descriptions of the gardens of Jannah, he commanded his architects to build its earthly duplicate. For 300 years they labored, constructing a city of gold, silver, and precious jewels, with pillars so vast and towering they seemed to hold up the sky. The moral core of the tale is its conclusion. Shaddad and his people, en route to inaugurate their blasphemous paradise, were struck down by a divine cataclysm, a scorching, suffocating wind that screamed for 7 nights and 8 days, scouring the city from the face of the earth and burying it beneath the sands of the Rub al-Khali, the terrifyingly vast and empty quarter of emptiness. For over 1,000 years, Aram remained exactly that, a powerful moral allegory. Western scholars, when they encountered the tale, largely dismissed it as a mythological echo, a desert version of Sodom and Gomorrah crafted to serve a theological purpose. The search for a physical, archaeological Aram seemed like the most futile of quests. The Rub al-Khali is one of the most extreme and inhospitable deserts on the planet, a sea of dunes the size of France, where temperatures soar and water is a phantom. To suggest a major city could have existed there was to invite ridicule. The search required a paradigm shift, a new way of seeing the unseen. That shift came from the sky. In the early 1980s, a team including filmmaker Nicholas Clapp and archaeologist Joris Zarens embarked on an ambitious project. They turned to NASA, a recently declassified satellite imagery and radar data, hoping to trace the ancient frankincense trade routes that once crisscrossed the peninsula. Frankincense was the oil of the ancient world, worth its weight in gold, and its transport from the trees of Dhofar in modern Oman to the markets of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean would have required well-established roads and watering holes. The satellite images revealed something astonishing, a web of faint, ancient tracks converging like ghostly threads on a single point in the Omani sector of the desert. These were the camel roads, invisible from the ground but unmistakable from space. Where they met, the radar, which could penetrate the dry sand, suggested the presence of geological anomalies, what looked like the outlines of a large, collapsed cavern or sinkhole right at the crossroads. This was the clue. In 1992, an expedition reached this remote location, known to local Bedouin as Shisur. What they found was not a city of golden pillars, but something perhaps more significant: the ruins of a large, octagonal fortified city built around the mouth of a massive limestone sinkhole. This was a natural well, a source of precious water in an otherwise lifeless void. The archaeology was clear. This was Yubar, a legendary frankincense trading hub long known from Roman and other historical sources as a key caravan city. Pottery, incense burners, and the foundations of towers and walls confirmed it had been a wealthy and important center from roughly 2000 BC until it met a dramatic end. The evidence suggested that the city's downfall was not a divine wind, but a profoundly physical catastrophe. The limestone cavern beneath it, weakened by centuries of drawing water, had finally collapsed, swallowing much of the fortress into the earth. The discovery of Yubar did not prove the existence of the Quranic Eram in a literal sense. No inscriptions bearing the name Eram were found. Instead, it provided a stunning historical and archaeological context for the legend. It demonstrated that a major, wealthy city did exist in the depths of the fearsome Rub al-Khali. Its fate, a sudden, catastrophic disappearance into the sand, perfectly aligns with the folk memory of a city punished and swallowed whole. Scholars like Dr. Zarins proposed a compelling synthesis that Yubar was the real city and Eram of the Pillars was its legendary, mythologized name. Its pillars, perhaps a poetic reference to the towering tents of its people or the immense, supporting columns of its grand caravanserais. The story of the Ad and their hubris was then layered onto the memory of this real place's tragic end, transforming a geological disaster into a timeless moral lesson. This chronicle masterfully illustrates the intricate dance between history and morality in sacred texts. The Quran's brief mention of Eram was never intended as a geological survey. It was a reminder, using a story already deeply ingrained in the Arabian consciousness, of a universal truth, that no civilization, no matter how powerful or technologically advanced, is immune to the consequences of its own arrogance. The sands that buried Yubar did not care about human wealth or ambition. The story of Eram endures because it speaks to anxiety that transcends culture and epoch. The fear that our greatest achievements might also contain the seeds of our own destruction, and that the landscape itself might one day rise up to reclaim all that we have built upon it. And now we turn from lost cities and sunken kingdoms to perhaps the most personal and intimate of all mythical quests, the search not for a place but for a state of being. The legend of the Fountain of Youth speaks to a universal human fear and a desperate hope, a dream of turning back time's relentless march and reclaiming the vitality of our younger selves. This story is often simplified to a single image: the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, dressed in conquistador armor, wading through a Florida swamp in a foolish, vain search for a magical spring. But the true history of this myth is far richer, far older, and reveals a fascinating journey of a story across continents and centuries before it ever reached the shores of the New World. We can trace the earliest threads of this idea back to the ancient world, specifically to the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC. In his sprawling work, The Histories, he recounts a tale told to him about a distant, mystical land in Ethiopia. He describes a special water source used by a tribe called the Macrobians, whose name itself means long-lived. The water from this spring was said to be so uniquely light and pure that it granted the people who drank from it extraordinary health and longevity, with many living to well over 100 years. This was not yet a fountain that reversed aging, but it was a powerful starting point, a natural wonder that bestowed a dramatically extended prime of life, planting the seed of possibility in the classical imagination. This seed was then nurtured and dramatically transformed in the medieval European mind by one of history's most enduring phantoms, Prester John. As we explored earlier, the legendary letter from this priest-king described his kingdom as a land of impossible marvels. Among its wonders was a fountain of youth, explicitly named and described as a spring that could restore youth to anyone who bathed in it or drank from it 3 times. This was the crucial evolution. It was no longer just about living longer, it was about actively becoming young again. This fantastical account, circulating through every royal court in Christendom, fused the classical notion of a life-extending spring with the Christian allegorical tradition of spiritual rebirth, creating an irresistible and specific promise of physical renewal. So how did this Eurasian myth become so firmly attached to Florida and a Spanish explorer? The story of Juan Ponce de Leon's connection is a classic case of historical irony and likely a case of mistaken identity centuries after the fact. Ponce de Leon was a bona fide conquistador, a veteran of Columbus's second voyage and the brutal subjugation of Puerto Rico, where he served as the island's first governor. In 1513, having lost his political post, he secured a royal contract to explore and colonize an island the native Taino people called Bimini, which lay somewhere to the northwest of Cuba. His motives, according to the official documents and his own contemporary reports, were entirely standard for his time: to seek new lands for the crown, to convert native souls, and to find gold and slaves to enrich himself. There is not a single shred of contemporary evidence from Ponce de Leon himself or his crew that mentions a search for a fountain of youth. The connection was made decades after his death by court historians, most notably Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo y Valdés, who was highly critical of Ponce de Leon. Oviedo, writing in the 1530s, sought to mock the aging explorer, portraying him as a gullible fool who wasted the crown's money chasing native tall tales about a rejuvenating river in Florida. It was a powerful and enduring piece of historical slander that stuck. The truth is likely more practical. As Ponce de Leon and his men explored the coast of what he named La Florida, the land of flowers, they would have encountered countless freshwater springs, a vital and welcome resource after weeks at sea. The indigenous peoples of Florida, particularly the Timbuktu and Calusa, held these springs as sacred sites of purification and healing. To the Spanish, already primed by the Prester John legends circulating in their culture, the sight of these crystal-clear waters bubbling up from the earth, combined with the natives' reverence for them, could have easily been misinterpreted. They weren't searching for a mythical fountain. They may have simply believed they had stumbled upon it. The geological reality of Florida's aquifer system adds a compelling layer of plausibility to this misunderstanding. Northern Florida is home to hundreds of natural artesian springs, like the famous Silver Springs and Rainbow Springs. These are not stagnant ponds, but dynamic, powerful outlets where millions of gallons of cool, crystal-clear water per day surge up from the vast limestone aquifer below. For an explorer from arid Spain, the sight of such pure, abundant water, constantly renewing itself from a hidden source deep within the earth, must have seemed miraculous. It is the perfect embodiment of the fountain of youth myth, a literal, physical manifestation of nature's endless cycle of renewal. The water itself is filtered and purified over centuries as it travels through the limestone, making it exceptionally clear and free of the contaminants that plagued European water sources, potentially lending it a perceived, if not actual, health-giving property. Beyond the historical and geological explanations lies the profound and timeless psychological appeal of the myth. The desire for youth is arguably one of the most powerful and deeply rooted human impulses. It is a desire to reclaim not just physical strength and beauty, but also time itself, the potential of a life not yet lived, the correction of past mistakes, and the escape from the pain and infirmity of old age. This universal yearning is why the myth has never faded. It has been a constant driver of exploration, from the Spanish conquistadors to the modern-day billionaires funding biotech startups in Silicon Valley. The quest for the fountain of youth has simply changed its form. Today, we search for it in genomics, cryogenics, hormone therapies, and dietary supplements, but the underlying dream remains identical: to cheat death and preserve the self. The legend's cultural footprint is immense, shaping literature from the travels of Alexander the Great to Washington Irving's tales and Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. It has been used to sell everything from cosmetics to health retreats, proving its potent marketability. The myth endures because it is more than just a story about water. It is a narrative about human hope, vanity, and our fraught relationship with mortality. It asks a question that resonates with every generation. If you could drink from those waters, would you? The promise is irresistible, but it carries a hidden weight, a warning about the cost of such a desire and the nature of a life unmoored from time's natural flow. The fountain of youth remains elusive not because it is hidden in some remote swamp, but because it exists within us as a dream of perfection that forever dances just beyond our grasp. Yet, as the thirst for lost origins spread from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, another captivating theory was already rising from the Pacific, a grand and doomed idea that would capture the early 20th century's imagination. This is the lost continent of Mu, a story that begins not with ancient philosophers, but with a flamboyant and controversial 19th century figure, Augustus Le Plongeon. A pioneering photographer and amateur archaeologist, Le Plongeon spent years excavating Mayan ruins in the Yucatan, and it was there he became convinced he had uncovered a secret history far grander than anyone had imagined. Through a highly imaginative and widely dismissed translation of the Mayan Trono Codex, he postulated that the world's oldest civilization was not in the Old World, but on a sunken landmass in the Pacific Ocean. He named this continent Mu, and he claimed it was the source of all ancient knowledge, a place whose survivors had fled to Central America and Egypt, seeding their cultures. In his narrative, Mu was the true cradle of civilization, a Pacific Atlantis whose story had been encoded in Mayan texts waiting for him to decipher. But it was not Le Plongeon who truly launched Mu into the public consciousness. That task fell to a retired British colonial officer named James Churchward. In the 1920s, Churchward published a series of sensational books, most famously The Lost Continent of Mu, which became international bestsellers. His story was even more extraordinary. He claimed that while serving in India in the 1860s, he had befriended a high-ranking temple priest who showed him a set of ancient, secret clay tablets written in a forgotten language called Knockle. Over years of study, Churchward said he learned to read this language and discovered that these tablets contained the complete history of Mu, the motherland of humanity. His descriptions were vividly precise. Mu was a vast, idyllic continent stretching from north of Hawaii to the Fiji Islands. It was home to 64 million people, the Knockles, who possessed advanced technology, flew aircraft, and lived in a sophisticated society free of war and strife. This paradise, however, was doomed. Churchward described a cataclysmic day when volcanic gases built up in subterranean chambers beneath the continent, causing it to shudder, fracture, and then be utterly engulfed by the Pacific in a single, terrible convulsion. The few survivors, he claimed, spread across the world, becoming the progenitors of the Egyptian, Mayan, Indian, and other ancient cultures, explaining their shared myths of a great flood. The appeal of Churchward's narrative was immense, arriving at a perfect cultural moment. The public was fascinated by theories of lost worlds, fueled by the recent discovery of Troy and King Tut's tomb, which suggested that grand legends could be true. Churchward offered a simple, sweeping answer to one of archaeology's most complex questions. Why do disparate ancient cultures share similar myths, architectural styles, and symbols? Instead of the slow, complicated process of cultural diffusion, the gradual sharing of ideas through trade, migration, and contact, Churchward provided a thrilling shortcut. The pyramid builders of Egypt and the Maya weren't innovating independently. They were both drawing on a shared, superior source. The flood stories found in countless cultures weren't local events. They were all racial memories of Mu's destruction. It was an all-encompassing theory, a key that promised to unlock every ancient mystery at once. From a scientific standpoint, however, the theory of Mu collapses completely under scrutiny. Modern geology provides the most definitive rebuttal. The theory of plate tectonics, firmly established in the mid-20th century, gives us a clear understanding of the Pacific seafloor. There is no evidence of a sunken continent. The Pacific plate is primarily composed of dense basaltic rock, which is much thinner and heavier than the granitic rock that makes up continents. Continents simply do not sink, they are too buoyant. They can fracture, experience volcanism, or have sections submerged by rising sea levels, but an entire landmass the size of Mu cannot vanish into the abyss. Furthermore, ocean core samples and seafloor mapping reveal a history of continuous subsidence, not a sudden, catastrophic collapse. Archaeologically, the evidence is just as absent. There are no traces of a pan-Pacific civilization, no shared artifacts, no sudden, simultaneous appearance of advanced technology on all surrounding coastlines that would indicate an influx of survivors from a central source. The cultural similarities Churchward pointed to are better explained by independent invention and the incredible seafaring abilities of Polynesian cultures, who populated the Pacific Islands through intentional, remarkable voyages, not a desperate flight from a sinking homeland. So why does the myth of Mu and others like it persist with such stubborn vitality? These stories fulfill a profound psychological need for a simpler, more romantic past. They harken back to an imagined golden age, a time of unified human purpose and advanced wisdom that was tragically lost. This provides a comforting narrative for the perceived chaos and fragmentation of modern life. Furthermore, lost continent theories are inherently egalitarian and rebellious. They challenge the orthodox, often slow-moving academic establishment, suggesting that a lone visionary with a daring theory can uncover truths that hidebound scholars have missed. They transform the messy, complex tapestry of human history, woven from thousands of threads of migration, trade, and independent genius, into a neat, single-origin story. A story that is often more satisfying to the human desire for order and connection than the complicated, evidence-based reality. Mu endures not as a geological fact, but as a powerful cultural symbol, a testament to our endless fascination with the idea that all our greatest achievements might simply be echoes of a glory that was, and a longing for a world that once was whole. Yet if the search for Mu was a modern attempt to find a single source for all civilization, our next chronicle focuses on a far more intimate and spiritually potent object of desire, one that has driven quests not for empire or origin but for the soul. We move now from the vast, sunken continents of the Pacific to the misty forests of Arthurian Britain, to the most sacred and elusive relic of them all, the Holy Grail. Unlike the grand geographical myths, the Grail is a small, personal artifact, but its symbolic weight is immense. Its story begins not in Camelot, but in a Jerusalem upper room. Christian tradition holds it was the cup used by Jesus Christ at the Last Supper, the very vessel that held the wine he declared to be his blood, instituting the Eucharist. Later legends, woven by medieval poets like Chrétien de Troyes and Robert de Boron, claim it was also used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch the blood of the crucified Christ at the foot of the cross, forever sanctifying it with the very essence of sacrifice and redemption. This sacred object was then said to have been brought by Joseph to the mystical Isle of Avalon, which medieval writers identified with Glastonbury in England. There it became the centerpiece of a divine mystery, guarded by a line of keepers and hidden in a mystical castle that was itself a test of spirituality. The Grail quest, as laid out in the romances, was the ultimate test of a knight's worth, far surpassing any battle or tournament. It was not a challenge of strength, but of purity. Ordinary knights could not find it. The castle of the Fisher King, where the Grail was kept, remained invisible to them, a realm that could only be perceived by those free of sin. The quest was ultimately achieved by the two most perfect knights, the innocent Percival, who succeeded through his guileless persistence, and the flawless Galahad, whose spiritual perfection was so absolute that upon finally beholding the Grail, he was taken up to heaven, too pure for this world. The stories describe the Grail not just as a physical cup, but as a source of miraculous sustenance and divine vision, radiating a light that fed the worthy and condemned the unworthy. But to view the Grail solely through a Christian lens is to miss the deep, older currents that flow beneath its legend. Long before the Crusades brought tales of Eastern relics back to Europe, the Celtic peoples of Britain and Brittany told stories of magical cauldrons. These were not ordinary pots, they were artifacts of the otherworld. The cauldron of the Dagda in Irish myth could provide endless food, ensuring no one left its presence hungry. The cauldron of Bran, the blessed in Welsh lore, could restore the dead to life, though they would be unable to speak. Most notably, one of the central tasks in the Welsh epic P. Will, Prince of Dyfed, involves the quest for a magical cup, a precursor to the Grail romances. These cauldrons were symbols of sovereignty, abundance, and regeneration, central to the pagan Celtic worldview. When Christian monks and poets began to record the stories of their converted people, a profound synthesis occurred. The powerful, ancient symbol of the life-giving cauldron was seamlessly merged with the new Christian symbol of the Eucharist cup, creating a hybrid legend that was both immediately familiar to a Celtic audience and theologically potent for the Church. The Grail became a bridge, transforming a pagan myth of magical abundance into a Christian parable of spiritual salvation. This fusion of history and myth has, of course, fueled an endless search for the Grail's physical reality. Several historical artifacts have claimed the title. In the Basilica of San Isidoro in Leon, Spain, the Cup of the Doña Arroca is a simple agate chalice mounted in medieval gold and jewels. Its proponents argue it was brought from Jerusalem to Egypt and then to Spain, and some even claim scientific dating places its carving in the right era, though this is heavily disputed. In the Cathedral of Genoa, Italy, the Sacro Catino is a striking hexagonal bowl of green glass, long believed to be emerald, which was brought back after the First Crusade and venerated as the true Grail for centuries, until modern analysis proved it was simply glass. Perhaps the most famous claimant is the Valencia chalice, an ancient agate cup set on a magnificent medieval gold and gemstone base. Its documented history is impressive, tracing back to the early centuries of the Church in Spain, and it is the object most frequently used by the Vatican for public displays related to the Last Supper. Yet, even its most ardent supporters cannot provide an unbroken chain of custody back to the upper room in Jerusalem. The true power of the Holy Grail, however, lies not in its potential existence as a historical artifact, but in its incredible versatility as a symbol. It is the ultimate metaphor for the unattainable goal, the lifelong pursuit that gives meaning to the journey itself. In the 19th century, the Grail was resurrected by the Romantic movement, most famously in Alfred, Lord Tennyson's Idyls of the King, and Richard Wagner's opera Parsifal, where it became a symbol of a lost ideal of purity and faith in an increasingly industrial and skeptical world. In the 20th century, its meaning expanded again. Psychologist Carl Jung saw it as a symbol of the self, the ultimate goal of individuation and psychological wholeness. Modern stories, from Indiana Jones to Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, have reinterpreted it as everything from a source of immortality to a metaphor for the sacred feminine and the bloodline of Christ. Its enduring appeal is a testament to its simple, profound shape, a vessel. It is an empty container into which every generation and every seeker can pour their own greatest desire, whether it is for God, for knowledge, for healing, or for a past golden age. The Grail is not something to be found, but something to be sought, a perpetual reminder that the most valuable treasures are those that ask us to look not just at the world, but within ourselves. But our journey through the chronicles of lost lands now brings us to a story of a very different character, not a sunken continent or a desert metropolis, but a drowned kingdom remembered with a particularly poignant and personal sense of tragedy. This is the legend of Cantre Gwaelod, which translates to the Lowland Hundred, a fertile and prosperous realm said to lie now beneath the waves of Cardigan Bay off the coast of Wales. Unlike the grand, philosophical allegory of Atlantis, the story of Cantre Gwaelod is a folk memory, a local tale passed down through generations that carries the deep, melancholic weight of a very specific and avoidable loss. The most famous version of the legend paints a vividly human picture of the catastrophe. Cantre Gwaelod was a vast, low-lying territory protected from the sea by a great dike or embankment that held back the waters. At high tide, sluice gates in this dike had to be closed to prevent flooding, a crucial duty entrusted to a watchman. In one telling, this watchman was a prince named Seithanin, a man known for his fondness for drink. On one fateful night, a great storm gathered while Seithanin was deep in his cups, neglecting his duty. The gates were left open and the sea rushed in, drowning the land, its villages and its people in a single, terrible night. Another version replaces the drunken prince with Mararid, a priestess of a sacred well, who failed to tend to her duties, allowing the well to overflow and join with the sea to submerge the kingdom. In both tellings, the core of the story remains the same. A single moment of human negligence led to an entire world being swallowed by the sea. The power of this myth is amplified by the haunting auditory folklore that surrounds it. Local tradition insists that on a quiet, still day, if you are out on the waters of Cardigan Bay, you can still hear the bells of the drowned churches of Cantre Gwaelod ringing mournfully beneath the waves. This poetic detail transforms the legend from a simple historical account into a permanent, spectral presence in the Welsh consciousness, a constant auditory reminder of what was lost just beyond the horizon. It speaks to a landscape that feels haunted by its own past, where the boundary between the present and the lost world is as thin as the surface of the water. This isn't just a story about something that happened long ago. It's a story about a loss that is still felt, a memory that the land itself seems to echo. And remarkably, the land itself provides compelling evidence that this is more than just a fable. At extremely low spring tides, particularly after winter storms have scoured the seabed, the skeletal remains of this lost world are revealed. The stumps of ancient petrified forests become visible along the Welsh coast, most famously between the towns of Ynyslys and Borth. These are not mere scattered logs, but the ghostly outlines of a once thriving ecosystem. Among the tree roots, archaeologists and paleoecologists have found preserved peat beds containing the pollen, nuts, and leaves of oak, pine, and birch trees, painting a picture of a dense, fertile woodland. Even more strikingly, they have uncovered the footprints of humans and animals, aurochs, red deer, and wild boar frozen in time in the hardened peat, capturing a snapshot of daily life from thousands of years ago. These are not the paved streets of a sunken city, but they are something perhaps more powerful, the tangible traces of a real, inhabited landscape that is now completely submerged. Further evidence emerges from the fishing communities of the bay, whose nets have occasionally snagged on the remains of ancient stone walls and human-made structures lying on the seafloor, adding another layer of credibility to the idea of a once-inhabited plain. The scientific explanation for this submerged world is now well understood by geologists and archaeologists. During the last ice age, so much of the planet's water was locked up in massive glaciers that global sea levels were dramatically lower. What is now Cardigan Bay was not a bay at all, but a vast, exposed coastal plain, a continuation of the current Welsh coastline with its own rivers, forests, and grasslands. This was a rich environment that would have attracted hunter-gatherer communities following herds of game. However, as the ice sheets began to melt around 12,000 years ago, sea levels started a long, inexorable rise in a process known as glacio-isostatic adjustment. The land itself, once compressed by the immense weight of the ice, was also slowly rebounding, but not quickly enough to outpace the rising water. The drowning of Cantre Gwaelod was not a single, catastrophic event as the legend describes, but a slow, relentless process that unfolded over generations. Communities would have been forced to retreat again and again, watching their ancestral hunting grounds and eventually their homes gradually disappear beneath the advancing sea. Occasional, more dramatic events, a major storm surge, a tsunami caused by an underwater landslide would have caused sudden, catastrophic flooding that would have been seared into the collective memory of the survivors, providing the dramatic kernel of truth around which the legend of the negligent watchman grew. The story of Cantre Gwaelod is far from unique. It is a powerful example of a global phenomenon. From the Welsh tale, we can draw a direct line to the Breton legend of Wise, a magnificent city drowned when its king's daughter, Dahut, gave the key to the sea gates to a demon lover. In the North Sea, similar stories abound, like the English tale of the Bells of Dunwich, a town slowly eaten away by coastal erosion. The most famous parallel is, of course, the biblical flood of Noah, but these local coastal flood myths feel different, more intimate, more specific, and more directly tied to the lived experience of people who depended on the sea for their survival. These stories served a crucial function in pre-literate societies. They were not mere entertainment, they were a form of oral history, a way to encode and transmit vital information about environmental change and coastal hazards across hundreds of generations. The story of the drunken Seathanin is at its heart a powerful cautionary tale. It taught each new generation the critical importance of maintaining the sea defenses, of vigilance, and of community responsibility. A single person's failure could doom everyone. This moral lesson was wrapped in a narrative that also explained the very real, physical evidence that the people could see with their own eyes: the petrified forests at low tide, the stone walls snagged by fishing nets. The legend of Cantre Gwaelod, therefore, stands as a beautiful and tragic synthesis of observable reality, historical experience, and cultural wisdom. A perfect example of how a myth can be both a captivating story and a profound, practical truth. But our journey now takes us from the drowned lowlands of Wales to the sun-scorched crossroads of the ancient world, where the air shimmers with the scent of frankincense and the echo of a legendary meeting that has captivated 3 major world religions. We arrive at the enigmatic chronicle of the Queen of Sheba, a figure who strides confidently out of the pages of sacred texts and into the very heart of a geopolitical and cultural mystery that spans continents. Her story begins with a tantalizingly brief yet profoundly rich account in the Hebrew Bible. In the first book of Kings, chapter 10, we are told of a powerful monarch from a distant land simply called Sheba, who, upon hearing of the fabulous wisdom and wealth of King Solomon, decides to put his reputation to the test. She arrives in Jerusalem with a staggering caravan, camels laden with spices, an immense quantity of gold and precious stones. The text describes a meeting of immense intellectual and political gravity. She questions him with all that was on her mind, and Solomon answers all her questions. Nothing was too hidden for the king to explain to her. This was not a simple state visit. It was an examination, a summit between 2 equals, and Solomon's wisdom, his palace, and the worship at his temple so overwhelm her that she proclaims, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. How happy your people must be." She bestows upon him lavish gifts, and he, in turn, gives her all she desired, after which she returns to her own country. This biblical nucleus is just the beginning. The Quran, in Surah An-Naml, expands the narrative with its own profound theological layer. Here, the queen, named Bilqis, rules a people who worship the sun. She is a model of cautious and wise leadership. When she receives a letter from Solomon, who commands not just armies but also jinn and animals, inviting her to submit to the one true God, she does not react with arrogance. Instead, she consults her advisors, demonstrating a collaborative leadership style, and decides to send Solomon gifts not as tribute but as a test to gauge his true nature. When Solomon dismisses her wealth, stating that what God has given him is far better, she realizes she is dealing with a power far beyond the material. The most famous Quranic moment involves her throne. Solomon, wishing to humble her before she even arrives, asks his jinn to retrieve her magnificent throne to his palace in the blink of an eye. When she arrives and is asked if it seems familiar, she recognizes it but acknowledges the divine power at work, famously declaring her submission to God alongside Solomon. This narrative transforms the meeting from an exchange of courtly pleasantries into a powerful story of spiritual awakening and conversion. Where the sacred texts end, legend and tradition explode with vibrant color, particularly in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian epic, the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, written in the 14th century, weaves the most elaborate and enduring tapestry. Here, the Queen of Sheba is named Mekhta, and her journey to Solomon is one of seeking wisdom. The epic tells of a romantic encounter where Solomon, bound by an oath not to take anything from her by force, tricks the wise queen into sharing his bed by serving a meal so heavily spiced that she would be compelled to drink water, which he had placed just beyond her side of the room. He argues that by taking the water, she has taken something of his, thus releasing him from his oath. From their union is born a son, Menelik I. When Menelik comes of age, he travels to Jerusalem to meet his father. Upon his return to Ethiopia, he is accompanied by the firstborn sons of the Israelite priests, who, in a moment of profound significance, secretly bring the Ark of the Covenant with them, replacing it with a replica in Solomon's temple. This single claim forms the absolute bedrock of Ethiopian national and religious identity. It establishes the Solomonic dynasty, a line of emperors that ruled until the overthrow of Haile Selassie in 1974, and it places Ethiopia at the center of sacred history as the New Zion, the rightful home of God's covenant. This powerful legend inevitably raises the historical question: if she was real, where was her kingdom? The search has focused primarily on two regions, each with a compelling case. The first and most historically supported candidate is in the southern Arabian Peninsula, in what is now Yemen. Here, the ancient Sabaean kingdom was a formidable power, controlling the incredibly lucrative frankincense and spice trade routes. Its capital was Marib, a city whose immense ruins still stand testament to its greatness, including a massive dam that allowed for sophisticated agriculture in the desert. The Sabaeans were wealthy, powerful, and their religion involved astral worship, including the sun, which aligns with the Quranic account of Bilqis's people. Inscriptions and archaeological evidence confirm they were a literate, organized society that could have easily mounted a royal expedition to appear like Solomon. The journey from Marib to Jerusalem, while long, was along established trade networks, making it entirely plausible. The second and culturally dominant claimant is the highlands of Ethiopia. Here, the city of Aksum would later become the capital of a mighty empire, though its peak was several centuries after Solomon's reign. Proponents of the Ethiopian tradition point to the ancient name for the region, Diletatubiafmt, as a potential origin for the name Sheba, though the linguistic connection is debated. More tangible are the ruins of a massive temple complex in Yaha, Ethiopia, which demonstrates a sophisticated pre-Aksumite civilization with strong South Arabian influences, suggesting a deep and ancient cultural exchange across the Red Sea. This evidence points not to a single, isolated kingdom, but to a world of interconnected Semitic cultures spanning the Narrow Sea, where people, ideas, and goods moved freely. It is entirely possible that the Queen of Sheba was a ruler whose influence or dominion stretched across both sides of this watery corridor, or that she ruled a powerful Sabaean-linked kingdom in the Ethiopian highlands. The truth may be that the legend preserves the memory of a real historical figure. a powerful, wise queen from the incense-rich lands of the south, whose specific origins became blurred by time and magnified by the immense cultural and religious significance placed upon her story. Her chronicle is a masterful blend of trade diplomacy, spiritual quest, and royal romance, a story that has forever linked the fates of Jerusalem and the Horn of Africa, and one that continues to inspire the search for a queen who challenged a king and found something far greater than either of them could have imagined. While the legend of the Queen of Sheba is woven from threads of sacred text and ancient trade routes, our next chronicle takes us to a city that is both profoundly real and deeply mythical, a place where the boundary between tangible history and fantastical rumor was forged by centuries of silence. This is the story of Petra, the rose-red city half as old as time, a legendary metropolis that vanished from Western maps only to re-emerge as one of archaeology's most stunning revelations. Unlike the sunken continents and drowned kingdoms we've explored, Petra was never truly lost. Its secret was kept not by the sea, but by the desert and the deliberate guardianship of the local Bedouin tribes, who protected its location for generations, allowing it to fade from the outside world's knowledge and blossom into a thing of pure myth. To understand how Petra could be forgotten, we must first appreciate the staggering scale of its ancient prosperity. Founded as early as the 4th century BC by the Nabateans, a nomadic Arab tribe renowned for their mastery of the desert, Petra became the undisputed capital of a commercial empire. Its genius lay in its location, nestled in a deep, narrow canyon known as the Sick, a natural fortress that also happened to sit at the crossroads of every major trading route in the region. This was the hub where the great caravans converged, bringing silks from China, spices from India, and ivory from Africa to be traded for the incense of Arabia. The Nabateans were the undisputed masters of this economy, and their wealth was beyond imagination, but they were also hydrological engineers of unparalleled skill. In a seemingly barren desert landscape, they devised an intricate system of dams, cisterns, and aqueducts that captured scarce rainwater, allowing their city to flourish with gardens, baths, and overflowing public fountains. This control over water in the heart of the desert was their true miracle, a feat that must have seemed like magic to visitors. Their wealth and security were set in stone, quite literally. Instead of building upwards, they carved their greatest monuments directly into the vibrant, striated sandstone cliffs. The most iconic of these, the Treasury or Al-Khosneh, is a breathtaking facade of towering columns, intricate statues, and ornate urns, all painstakingly chiseled from the living rock. For centuries, visitors arriving through the narrow, winding Sick would have their first view of the city framed by this magnificent structure, a deliberate display of power and artistry designed to awe merchants and diplomats before they even entered the city proper. Beyond it lay a sprawling metropolis of tombs, temples, theaters, and homes, all carved into the multicolored stone, earning Petra its enduring epithet as the Rose-Red City. This golden age could not last forever. In the 1st century BC, the Roman Empire began to encroach on Nabatean territory, eventually annexing the kingdom in 106 AD. While Petra remained an important Roman provincial city, its monopoly on trade routes was broken. The final blow, however, was not political but geological. A series of catastrophic earthquakes in the 4th and 7th centuries AD shattered the city's sophisticated water management system, its lifeblood. The vital canals and cisterns were destroyed, making it impossible to sustain a large population. As trade routes shifted to the sea and the city's infrastructure failed, Petra was gradually abandoned, its grand facades becoming the silent tombs of a bygone era. It was not completely empty, however. Over the centuries, it became home to new inhabitants, Byzantine Christians who converted a tomb into a church and left behind mosaics, and later, Crusaders who built a small fort on the hills above. But its time as a great metropolis was over. It was at this point that Petra began its transformation from a real, abandoned city into a mythical cipher in the Western imagination. As Europe plunged into the Middle Ages, knowledge of the ancient world was preserved and filtered through a handful of texts. Petra was mentioned in the Bible as Selah, and vague, romanticized accounts from pilgrims and traders who had heard rumors of a lost city in the deserts of the Levant kept a faint memory alive. For European scholars, it became a phantom, a place that was known to have existed but whose location and splendor were utterly unknown. This ignorance bred legend. Stories circulated of a city of immense treasure hidden in a narrow valley, protected by powerful jinn or lost tribes. The iconic urn atop the treasury facade is pockmarked with bullet holes, a testament to later Bedouin and early Western explorers' belief that it contained a pharaoh's hidden gold. The man who shattered this myth and reintroduced Petra to the West was a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. A remarkable linguist and scholar, he had immersed himself in Arab language and culture, allowing him to travel in disguise. In 1812, hearing rumors of a ruined city near the supposed tomb of the prophet Aaron, he convinced a local guide to take him there under the pretext of making a sacrifice. His account of what he saw, published after his death, reads like a moment of pure discovery. He described walking through the dark, narrow sick, emerging to see the stunning facade of the treasury illuminated by the sun, and realizing he had found the fabled lost city of the Nabateans. His report sent shockwaves through Europe, launching a wave of Orientalist fascination. Artists like David Roberts traveled there to paint its majestic ruins, and poets like John William Bergen, who had never set foot there, famously described it in a sonnet as a rose-red city half as old as time, cementing its magical image in the public consciousness. The Bedouin tribes, particularly the Bedouin, had known of Petra all along, living in its caves and considering it their hereditary home. For them, it was not a lost city but a lived-in one, a part of their daily reality. The Western rediscovery began a long and often contentious process of archaeological excavation and tourism that continues to this day. Petra's journey from a real trading hub to a near-mythical legend and back to a real-world heritage site is a powerful testament to how easily knowledge can be fractured by time and distance. It shows that a place doesn't need to sink beneath the waves to be lost. It can simply be forgotten by one world while being remembered by another. The silence that surrounded Petra for centuries allowed the desert winds to sculpt not just its stone, but its story, transforming a monument to human ingenuity into a whispered promise of hidden wonders, waiting for a curious enough soul to find the way through the sick once more. And now we shift our focus from the rock-hewn splendor of Petra to a land known only through the records of its greatest admirers, a place so rich and mysterious that its exact location remains one of history's most tantalizing puzzles. We journey to the land of Punt, a realm the ancient Egyptians called Tonetjer, the land of the god, a name that itself bestows an aura of divinity and otherworldly wonder. For over a millennium, the pharaohs of Egypt mounted great expeditions to this fabled place, not for conquest but for trade, seeking the most exotic and sacred commodities their world could imagine. Their records provide us not with a clear map but with a breathtaking inventory of desire. Heaps of fragrant myrrh and frankincense resins, coveted for temple rituals and the embalmer's art, sacks of electrum, a shimmering natural alloy of gold and silver, ebony wood blacker than the night, and living wonders like leopards, giraffes, and the dancing pygmies whose performances were believed. Please the gods, Punt was the ultimate source, a mythical marketplace at the edge of the known world where the most precious things on earth were said to originate. Our most vivid window into this ancient trade relationship comes from the mortuary temple of Der el-Bahari, built for the great female pharaoh Hatshepsut who ruled in the 15th century BC. Here, a magnificent series of detailed reliefs chronicles a successful expedition she sent to Punt, and they are far more than simple bragging. They are a sophisticated documentary. The carvings show the great Egyptian ships with their sails unfurled, braving the waters of the Red Sea. We see their arrival at the Puntite shore, marked by distinctive beehive-shaped huts built on stilts above the water, a detail that has become a crucial clue for modern archaeologists. The artists took great care to depict the unique flora and fauna, showing the Puntites themselves as distinctly different from Egyptians, with their own style of dress and physical features. Most touchingly, we see the ruler of Punt, the exceptionally proportioned Queen Ati, and her husband, King Parahu, receiving the Egyptian envoys with a mixture of curiosity and hospitality. The scenes of trade are lively, and specific Egyptian soldiers exchanging beads, weapons, and tools for the towering piles of incense trees, which were so valued that Hatshepsut's expedition carefully brought them back with their root balls preserved in baskets for replanting in the temple gardens of Thebes. This was not a raid, it was a state-sponsored commercial exchange between two sophisticated cultures. The enduring mystery, of course, is where exactly this land was situated. The ancient Egyptians, frustratingly, never felt the need to draw a modern map for future historians. They knew where they were going, and that was enough. This has left scholars to piece together the clues like detectives solving an ancient cold case. The primary debate has long centered on two regions, the southern Red Sea coast of Africa, in the area encompassing modern-day Eritrea, eastern Sudan, and northern Ethiopia, or the southwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula in what is now Yemen. The African hypothesis is powerfully supported by the animals depicted in the reliefs. Giraffes, leopards, and rhinoceroses are quintessentially African species. Furthermore, the genetic analysis of mummified baboons from ancient Egypt, which were likely imported from Punt, has pointed to an origin in the region of Eritrea or Ethiopia. The description of Punt as a source of ebony also fits neatly with the African interior. However, the Arabian theory is equally compelling. The incense trees themselves, myrrh and frankincense, are native to the southern Arabian coast and the Horn of Africa, but their cultivation was historically centered in what is now Oman and Yemen. The mention of the sea voyage in Hatshepsut's reliefs suggests a destination across the water, not simply down the African coast. The beehive huts on stilts are architectural styles that have been documented in both regions, making them a frustratingly universal clue. The most plausible resolution to this debate, and one that is gaining increasing traction, is that Punt was not a single pinpointable city, but rather a regional term. It may have referred to a vast and prosperous network of trade that spanned both sides of the Red Sea, a cultural and economic zone connected by the maritime routes that the Egyptians traversed. The Kingdom of Punt could have controlled ports in both Africa and Arabia, dealing in the resources of both continents. This idea transforms Punt from a lost city into a lost mercantile civilization, a powerful intermediary that connected the ancient world. Beyond the scholarly debate over coordinates, the story of Punt represents something far greater, the very dawn of long-distance economic exchange. These expeditions were colossal undertakings, requiring enormous state resources and a deep understanding of shipbuilding, navigation, and diplomacy. They mark a moment when a civilization's wants outstripped its immediate resources, driving it to look beyond its horizons and engage with distant peoples. The human desire for the rare, the fragrant, and the beautiful fueled the creation of the world's first great trade routes. Punt was the ancient equivalent of a source of diamonds or oil, a geographical lottery winner whose natural resources made it a legendary partner to the superpower of the age. Its mythic allure in the Egyptian mind, the fact they called it the God's Land, speaks to this powerful mystique. It was more than a trading partner. It was a semi-divine origin point for the very substances that allowed them to communicate with their gods and achieve immortality. The land of Punt, therefore, exists in that perfect space between historical fact and mythical allure. a real place that fulfilled the most magical of functions, providing the literal incense that rose to the heavens and the gold that adorned the masks of pharaohs destined to become gods. Its elusive nature only deepens its power, reminding us that the greatest mysteries are often not those that are completely lost, but those that are hiding in plain sight, their truth woven into the very fabric of history, waiting for us to connect the dots. Yet across the Aegean Sea, the legend of Troy faced a different fate. Unlike the silent, unproven chronicles of sunken continents, the story of Troy had a text, a vivid, sprawling, and incredibly detailed one. Homer's Iliad was not a vague rumor but a specific, epic account of a 10-year war, fought over the most beautiful woman in the world, culminating in the infamous ruse of the Trojan horse. For centuries, scholars in stuffy European libraries debated its validity. Was it pure myth, a poetic fantasy woven from threads of older tales, or could it be a distorted memory of a real, cataclysmic event from the Bronze Age? The prevailing academic opinion leaned heavily toward fiction. Troy was considered a legend, a powerful story, but not a place you could ever hope to find on a map. The idea that gods and heroes had once walked its walls was relegated to the realm of imaginative literature, not serious history. This scholarly consensus was about to be spectacularly upended by a man who was the opposite of a stuffy academic, a romantic, obsessive, and fabulously wealthy German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann. Schliemann was a living paradox, a self-made millionaire who had mastered numerous languages. He retired from commerce in his 40s to pursue a childhood dream, to prove Homer was not a liar but a historian. He was not a trained archaeologist, he was a zealot with a checkbook and an unshakable belief in the literal truth of the epic poems. Armed with his well-worn copy of the Iliad as his sole guide, he set out for northwestern Turkey in the 1870s, convinced he could find the city everyone else believed was a fairy tale. His methods were, by modern standards, nothing short of appalling. He was less a careful excavator and more a human bulldozer, driven by a singular goal: to find the Troy of King Priam and the Homeric heroes. He focused his efforts on a large mound called Hisarlik, a site that had been proposed by British consul and amateur archaeologist Frank Calvert, who owned part of the land. Calvert had conducted smaller, more methodical digs and was convinced this was the place, but he lacked the funds for a major excavation. Schliemann had the money and the manic drive. He immediately began digging massive, destructive trenches straight through the center of the mound, hurling aside centuries of history in his frantic quest for the Homeric city. What he uncovered was not one city, but a stunning revelation: multiple cities, built one on top of the other over thousands of years. Hisarlik was not a simple ruin. It was a historical layer cake, a tell containing the remains of at least 9 major settlement phases, each labeled Troy 1 through Troy 9. The initial discovery was breathtaking, but Schliemann's fanatical pursuit of a single truth caused irreparable damage to the broader archaeological record. He was so fixated on finding the Troy from the Iliad that he literally carved through and discarded evidence from other, equally important periods. Then, in May 1873, he made a find that would cement his fame and forever change the public's perception of his work. He uncovered a spectacular hoard of gold artifacts, exquisite jewelry, diadems, cups, and thousands of gold beads. In a now legendary and likely staged moment, he had his Greek wife, Sophia, photographed wearing what he dramatically declared to be the jewels of Helen. He announced to the world that he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, a statement that, while factually incorrect, was a public relations masterstroke. He had found what he called Priam's treasure, naming it after the Trojan king from the epic. The world was electrified. A legend had been given tangible form. Schliemann had pulled proof from the earth. We now know he was wrong on almost every count. The treasure he found was from a much earlier city, Troy II, which dated to around 2400 BC, over 1,000 years too early to be the Troy of the late Bronze Age Trojan War. Furthermore, his smuggling of the treasure out of Turkey breached his excavation permit and created diplomatic incidents that haunt museums to this day. But the impact was undeniable. He had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that a powerful, wealthy city had existed on that very spot, a city that had known war and fire just as Homer had described. Later, more meticulous archaeologists like Wilhelm Dörpfeld and Carl Blegen would continue the work, patiently untangling Schliemann's chaotic legacy. They were able to properly identify the different layers, and their work pointed to a specific candidate for the Homeric city, Troy 7a. This layer shows clear evidence of a violent and sudden end around 1180 BC, right at the close of the Bronze Age. The archaeology reveals a city that was besieged, with sling stones found in the streets and consumed by a devastating fire. Skeletons were discovered in hastily dug pits, suggesting a city under extreme duress. The date, the evidence of destruction, and the location all align perfectly with the general time frame and fate of the legendary Troy. While we will never find a sign saying Achilles slept here or a preserved Trojan horse, the evidence strongly suggests that Homer's epic was based on a kernel of historical truth, a major, traumatic conflict that destroyed a wealthy citadel controlling the vital Dardanelles Strait. The true revolution sparked by Schliemann's dramatic, flawed excavation was not just about finding a lost city. It was a fundamental shift in how we view ancient texts. Before him, myths were largely seen as entertaining fictions. After him, we were forced to consider that these stories could be repositories of cultural memory, oral histories passed down for generations that preserved the echo of real events, however distorted by time and poetic embellishment. The discovery of Troy gave archaeologists the courage to look at other great myths, from the travels of Odysseus to the labors of Hercules, not as mere stories, but as potential maps to a forgotten past. It taught us that the lines between myth and history are not always solid walls, but are often porous borders, where facts can be woven into legends and heroes can be born from the memories of real warriors. The stones of Hisarlik whisper that even our greatest stories might have started with a simple, powerful truth. Leaving behind the sun-baked ruins of Troy and the incense-laden shores of Punt, we now set sail for a different kind of mystery, one woven not from historical possibility, but from the deep, animistic magic of the Slavic world. Our journey brings us to the enigmatic island of Buyan, a place that exists not on any reliable map, but in the shifting realm of story and spirit. In Slavic mythology, Buyan is no ordinary piece of land. It is a magical island that appears and disappears at will within the sea, an elusive sanctuary shrouded in mist and mystery. It is not a destination one can simply navigate to, but a realm one must be worthy of finding, a place where the normal rules of reality are suspended and the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds grows thin. At the very heart of this magical isle lies its greatest treasure and the source of its immense power, the sacred stone Alata. This was no ordinary rock, but believed to be the first thing created by the gods, the navel of the world upon which the entire universe was founded. Legends describe it as a white, fiery stone, often inscribed with magical laws that govern the very fabric of existence. It was the omphalos, the world pillar, and the ultimate altar all in one. Upon Alata sat the supreme god Svarog, forging the fate of men and gods alike. It was the source of all rivers and the resting place of all wisdom, a single point of divine order in the chaotic sea. The island itself was home to powerful spirits and deities, most notably the weather god Perun, who would retreat to Buyan to rest after creating thunderstorms, storing his mighty bolts of lightning within the stone. This made the island not just a spiritual center, but a cosmological engine, a place where the forces of nature were generated and controlled. Given its profound significance, one cannot help but wonder if such a potent myth was inspired by a real, tangible place in the physical world. Scholars and folklorists have long debated potential geographical inspirations. and one of the most compelling candidates lies in the Baltic Sea, the island of Rügen off the coast of modern-day Germany. In the early medieval period, Rügen was a major cult center for the West Slavic tribe known as the Roni, who worshipped the god Svantovit at the magnificent temple of Arkona. This was a place of immense pagan power, a spiritual fortress that held out against Christian conversion longer than almost any other in the region. The temple itself housed a giant, four-headed wooden idol of Svantovit, and the island was considered so sacred that its soil could not be taken elsewhere. To a Slavic person living inland, hearing tales of this distant, powerful island where potent priests interpreted the will of the gods and rituals of immense importance were performed, it would have easily taken on the aura of a mythical, almost unreachable place of power, a real-world bullion. The rhythmic erosion of its chalk cliffs by the sea might also have contributed to the idea of an island that was changeable and impermanent, appearing and disappearing with the tides and the fog. Yet to confine bullion to a single geographical location is to miss its deeper, more fluid role in the Slavic consciousness. Beyond any potential real-world counterpart, bullion functions as a profound spiritual concept in Slavic paganism, a cosmological idea given form. It represents the sacred center, the axis mundi that connects the heavenly realm of Prav, the earthly world of Yav, and the underworld of Nav. Its appearing and disappearing act is a powerful metaphor for the elusive nature of divine wisdom and spiritual enlightenment. It cannot be found by those who seek it with brute force or greed, but only by those who are pure of heart and purpose. It is always there, yet not always visible, much like faith or destiny itself. This concept provided a framework for understanding the universe, placing the divine and the magical within the recognizable landscape of the sea, making it both part of the world and utterly transcendent. This mystical role is vividly illustrated in Slavic folk tales, where bullion is less a setting and more an active character in the narrative, a place of testing and transformation. In these stories, a hero is often given an impossible task: to journey to the island of bullion and retrieve something from it, perhaps a vial of living water or a specific herb of power. The journey itself is the first test, requiring immense perseverance and moral fortitude to even find the island. Upon arrival, the hero must then navigate its magical inhabitants and landscapes, often by showing respect, cunning, or compassion rather than strength. In one common tale, the hero must outwit a magical bird or animal that guards the stone ladder. Success in this quest doesn't just grant the hero a physical object. It signifies a spiritual transformation, a proving of one's worth that leads to the healing of a kingdom or the breaking of a terrible curse. Bullion in these narratives is the ultimate crucible where the ordinary is forged into the extraordinary. Ultimately, the enduring myth of the island of bullion, like the stories of Cantre Gwaelod or Lyonesse, is a masterful example of how cultures encode their values and their environmental knowledge into narrative. For a people living across the vast forest and river plains of Eastern Europe, the sea was a distant, mysterious, and powerful force. Stories of a magical island in that sea became a way to conceptualize and relate to that unknown power, to contain its mystery within a story that also reinforced core cultural beliefs about respect for nature, the importance of cunning over brute force, and the elusive nature of true power. The myth taught that the greatest forces in the world, be they storms, fate, or healing, are not controlled by man but reside in a sacred, protected place that demands reverence. It is a beautiful, complex chronicle that blends spiritual yearning with a deep connection to the natural world, reminding us that sometimes the most important places are not those we can permanently inhabit, but those we can only ever hope to visit in our dreams, armed with courage and a pure heart. But even as we chart the magical and the legendary, our journey now takes us to a place that is profoundly real, yet became so shrouded in the mists of foreign imagination that its very name became a byword for the ends of the earth. We arrive at the fabled and very much existing city of Timbuktu, For centuries in the Western world, to speak of Timbuktu was to invoke the ultimate symbol of remoteness, an impossibly distant and unknowable place you might jokingly threaten to send someone. This perception, however, was a spectacular failure of imagination, born not from the city's irrelevance, but from its inaccessibility to European minds. While medieval Europe was often mired in its own struggles, a magnificent intellectual and commercial revolution was flourishing in the heart of West Africa, and Timbuktu was its brilliant, beating heart. The city's origins are as pragmatic as they are poetic. Founded around the year 1100 by Tuareg nomads as a seasonal camp near the vital lifeblood of the Niger River, its name is said to come from an old woman named Buktu who guarded the camp's well. Timbuktu essentially means the place of Buktu. Its location was its destiny. It sat at the precise nexus where the great trans-Saharan trade routes met the riverine networks of West Africa. This made it the ultimate crossroads. Here, the camel caravans, sometimes 1,000 strong, arriving from the north after a 2-month journey across the dunes, would meet the boats laden with goods from the lush southern forests. The city became the central marketplace for an astonishing exchange. Salt from the desert mines of Taghaza, a commodity so precious it was literally traded for its weight in gold, was swapped for the gold itself, which poured from the mines of the south, along with ivory, cola nuts, and enslaved people. This trade generated almost unimaginable wealth, famously exemplified by the pilgrimage of the Mali Emperor Mansa Musa to Mecca in 1324. His caravan, laden with so much gold that its spending reportedly caused inflation in the economies of Cairo and Medina for a decade, put Timbuktu on the world map quite literally in the Catalan Atlas of 1375, which depicted the emperor enthroned there holding a golden nugget. Yet to focus solely on its commercial power is to miss its true, enduring genius. Timbuktu was not just a city of merchants, it was a city of scholars. The wealth generated by trade was lavishly invested in intellectual and spiritual capital. By the 14th century, it had evolved into a premier center of Islamic learning, home to the legendary Sankore University, which was not a single building but a decentralized network of independent schools and private libraries attached to the city's great mosques Sankore, Jingreba, and Sidi Yahya. Under the patronage of enlightened rulers, the city attracted the finest minds from across the Muslim world. The curriculum was vast and rigorous, encompassing not only Quranic studies and law, but also astronomy, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, history, and rhetoric. Students studied for years, and a diploma from Timbuktu's scholars carried immense prestige across Africa. The true measure of this intellectual fervor was the book. Timbuktu became a city of scribes, librarians, and bibliophiles. Families dedicated themselves to the art of copying and preserving texts, creating a culture where the ownership of books was seen as a greater status symbol than the ownership of gold. Over centuries, this produced an estimated 700,000 to 1 million manuscripts, creating what can only be described as the largest library in medieval Africa. These were not just religious texts but sophisticated works on science, medicine, and governance, written in exquisite calligraphy, some on paper imported from Venice, others on locally produced paper made from fish skin or goat hide. This was the reality of Timbuktu, a vibrant, cosmopolitan hub of knowledge that stood in stark contrast to its European caricature as a remote desert outpost. So how did this center of world-class scholarship become a metaphor for nowhere? The answer lies in the shifting tides of geopolitics and the walls of sand that isolated it. As European powers began their age of discovery, they bypassed the treacherous Sahara in favor of sea routes to the riches of the Indies and the Americas. The great trans-Saharan trade routes that had been Timbuktu's lifeblood began to wither. At the same time, a series of invasions, first by the Moroccan Saudi dynasty in the late 16th century and later by various warring groups, disrupted the delicate ecosystem of scholarship and trade. The city's decline was slow but steady. By the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a shadow of its former self, isolated and incredibly difficult for Europeans to reach. Those who tried, like the Scottish explorer Mungo Park, often met with failure or death. This lack of access created an information vacuum, which the Western imagination filled with pure fantasy. Timbuktu became a blank space on the map onto which Europeans projected their own desires and fears, a city where the streets were paved with gold, ruled by a fabulously wealthy king, a El Dorado of the Sahara. Its actual identity as a city of letters and law was completely obscured by the myth of it being a city of limitless precious metal. The final, tragic chapter in this story of misconception nearly saw the city's true treasure lost forever. In 2012, a militant Islamic extremist group seized control of Timbuktu during a conflict in Mali. Viewing the ancient manuscripts as heretical, they embarked on a campaign of destruction, burning any libraries they could find. But the descendants of Timbuktu's scholars had a plan worthy of their illustrious ancestors. In a daring, quiet operation, local librarians and families, risking their lives, organized a secret book smuggling operation. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were packed into metal lockers and vegetable crates, then transported by canoe under cover of night down the Niger River or hidden in safe houses within the city. It was a monumental effort to save their heritage, a testament to the fact that they never forgot what the outside world had long ignored, that these were not just old papers, but the soul of a civilization. The rescue of the Timbuktu manuscripts is one of the greatest cultural preservation stories of our time, a powerful reclaiming of the city's true narrative from the jaws of both literal and metaphorical destruction. The story of Timbuktu, therefore, is a chronicle of two cities, the mythical one of European legend, a phantom of gold and remoteness, and the real one, a testament to African intellectual achievement and resilience. Its journey from a global crossroads to a symbol of the unknown and back to a recognized World Heritage Site reminds us that the most profound lost cities are not always those that have vanished, but sometimes those whose truth has been waiting patiently for the world to finally understand what was there all along. Yet if the legend of Timbuktu shows how a real city can be mythologized by distance, our next chronicle presents a far more radical proposition, a myth that seeks to fundamentally reinvent our entire planet. We now descend into one of the most bizarre and enduring alternative cosmologies, the Hollow Earth theory. This is not a story of a lost city or continent, but of an entirely reconfigured world, a planet turned inside out, hiding a secret sun and civilizations of immense antiquity beneath our very feet. This audacious idea posits that Earth is not a solid sphere of rock and molten metal, but a hollow shell with openings at the north and south poles leading to an interior world, a realm sometimes called Agartha, populated by advanced beings or lost races. The scientific seed for this incredible notion was first planted by a man of impeccable scientific credentials, the English astronomer Edmund Halley of comet fame. In 1692, Halley was wrestling with anomalous compass readings that suggested the Earth's magnetic field was slightly variable. To explain this, he proposed a stunning model. Our planet was not solid, but a series of concentric spheres, all rotating at different speeds around a central, luminous core. This inner sun, he suggested, provided light and potentially even heat to the spaces between these shells, which might themselves be habitable. For Halley, this was a serious, if ultimately incorrect, scientific hypothesis aimed at explaining observable geomagnetic phenomena. His was a hollow earth of physics and mathematics, a rational attempt to solve a puzzle with the tools available at the time. The idea was then taken up and transformed from a scientific theory into a passionate crusade by a fascinatingly eccentric American Army officer named John Cleves Sims Jr. In the early 1800s, Sims became utterly possessed by what he called his theory of concentric spheres. He envisioned the Earth as hollow and open at the poles, declaring, I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees. Unlike Halley, Sims was an evangelist. He tirelessly lectured across the United States, publishing circulars and petitioning the U.S. Congress to fund an expedition to the North Pole to find the entrance to this inner world. His fervent campaign captured the public imagination, creating a wave of Sims' whole enthusiasm and inspiring a generation of writers and explorers. Although he died before seeing his dream realized, his advocacy permanently lodged the idea of polar openings into the American psyche, transforming it from an abstract theory into a tangible destination waiting to be discovered. This framework of a hollow planet provided an irresistible canvas for fiction, most notably in Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, which captured the public's sense of wonder and adventure. But the myth took a dark and sinister turn in the 20th century when it was absorbed into the twisted ideology of Nazi occultism. Figures within the SS, particularly those in the Onana, the organization dedicated to proving Aryan supremacy through pseudo-history and archaeology, became fascinated with the concept. They latched onto legends of Agartha, a supposed subterranean kingdom of superhuman beings who possessed the lost wisdom of Hyperborea. Some Nazis, including reportedly Rudolf Hess, became convinced that the entrances to this underworld were located in the Arctic or even the Himalayas. This belief allegedly fueled expeditions to places like Greenland and Tibet, not just for geopolitical advantage, but in a desperate, pseudo-mystical quest to contact these master race progenitors and secure their advanced technology for the Third Reich. The Hollow Earth myth was thus weaponized, its promise of hidden power perverted to serve a genocidal agenda. In the modern era, the theory has found a comfortable home in the sprawling ecosystem of internet conspiracy culture, where it often merges with ufology and New Age beliefs. The inner sun is reimagined as the power source for flying saucers. Agartha becomes the home of the ancient Atlanteans or even extraterrestrial visitors. This persistence reveals the theory's deeper psychological underpinnings. At its core, the Hollow Earth myth is a powerful response to the fear of a fully known and mapped world. In an age where satellite imagery leaves no square inch of the planet's surface unobserved, the idea of a vast, uncharted, and inaccessible realm hidden just out of sight provides a final frontier for the imagination. It represents a profound desire for there to be more mystery, more wonder, more possibilities for discovery than our current scientific understanding allows. It is a rebellion against the notion that our world is ordinary, proposing instead that the greatest adventures and the most profound truths are not in the stars above, but in the unexplored worlds below, a secret universe waiting for us to find the entrance. From the hollow fantasies of a world within our own, we now journey to a very different kind of submersion, one not of speculative cosmology, but of divine destiny and stone, a city lost not to imagination but to the sea itself. This is the chronicle of Dwarka, the legendary city of Lord Krishna, a realm that stands at the breathtaking intersection of unwavering faith and emerging archaeology. The story of Dwarka's rise and fall is not a peripheral legend but a central, heartbreaking episode in the grand Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. It describes how Krishna, the divine king and avatar of Vishnu, established his celestial capital on the western coast of India. He called upon the divine architect Vishwakarma to build a city of unparalleled splendor, a fortress of gold, silver, and emeralds, protected by massive walls and moats with vast boulevards and opulent palaces. It was a city of such grandeur that it was known as Dwarka, the gateway to heaven, a beacon of righteousness and power. This magnificent city, however, was built with a tragic expiration date. Its very existence was intertwined with Krishna's mortal life on earth. The Mahabharata and the later Puranas recount that following a great apocalyptic war and the subsequent departure of Krishna from the world, the age of righteousness, the Dvapara Yuga, came to a close. The oceans, which had once respectfully held back to allow the city to flourish, now rose up to claim it. The texts describe a chilling sequence. The sea flooded the streets, swallowing the glorious palaces and towers, reclaiming the land in a single, catastrophic event. The survivors watched from boats as their home, the abode of their god, vanished beneath the waves, leaving only memory and myth in its wake. For millennia, this was understood as a powerful allegory, the symbolic end of a divine era, a lesson on the impermanence of all things, even the works of gods. But what if the waves that closed over Dwarka left more than just a story? In the late 1980s, an Indian archaeologist named Dr. S.R. Rao began a systematic investigation off the coast of the modern city of Dwarka in Gujarat. What he and his team began to uncover would send ripples through both the academic and religious worlds. Using sonar surveys and dredging, they identified massive stone structures lying on the seabed. These were not random geological formations, but the clear outlines of fortification walls, grids of streets, and the foundations of what appeared to be a large port complex. The most striking finds were a series of stone anchors and a specific stone block with a hole, which closely resembled mooring stones used to tie ships in ancient harbors. The sheer scale of the submerged ruins suggested a sophisticated, planned urban center that had been engaged in extensive maritime trade. The artifacts recovered from the site added compelling layers to the discovery. Pottery shards, some decorated with redware and others of a distinctly Mesopotamian design, were brought to the surface. Most astonishingly, a few stone artifacts were inscribed with what appeared to be a late form of the Indus Valley script, a tantalizing hint at a possible cultural continuity. When samples of the stone and pottery were subjected to thermoluminescence dating, the results pointed to a time frame between 3,000 and 3,500 years ago, roughly aligning with the traditional date for the Mahabharata War and the lifetime of Lord Krishna. For millions of believers, these underwater findings were not merely interesting archaeological data. They were a profound validation, a physical proof that their most sacred stories were rooted in historical truth. The discovery was seen as a miraculous convergence of Shraddha, faith, and Itihas, history. Of course, the scientific community urges caution and maintains a healthy debate. The major point of contention is the nature of the submersion. Mainstream geology explains the sunken structures not with a single, catastrophic flood sent by the gods, but through the well-documented process of post-glacial sea level rise. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels were nearly 100 meters lower than they are today. The coast of India would have extended far out into what is now the Arabian Sea. As the glaciers melted, the waters rose steadily over thousands of years, gradually inundating coastal settlements. A thriving port city like ancient Dwarka, built on the very edge of the land, would have been increasingly threatened by storm surges and rising tides over centuries, eventually being abandoned and then completely submerged. This slow, environmental process is a far cry from the dramatic, overnight drowning described in the epic, yet the final result, a city lost to the sea, is identical. The myth may have compressed a long, traumatic process of coastal erosion and gradual flooding into a single, divinely ordained event to give it greater narrative and moral power. The story of Dwarka cannot be separated from the broader tapestry of flood myths that are woven deeply into the fabric of Indian culture and history. This is not an isolated tale. The ancient Sanskrit text, the Satapatha Brahmana, contains a detailed account of a great flood where the first man, Manu, is warned by a fish of the coming deluge. He builds a boat, saves all living creatures, and after the waters recede, becomes the progenitor of a new humanity. This story bears a striking resemblance to the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh and the biblical story of Noah, suggesting a shared, ancient memory of catastrophic flooding that permeated cultures across the ancient world. In the Indian context, these stories do more than just recount a disaster. They serve a profound philosophical purpose. They illustrate the Hindu cosmological concept of cyclical time, where creation and destruction are not singular events but recurring phases in the endless rhythm of the universe. The submersion of Dwarka is not a final ending but a necessary dissolution, a pralaya, that makes way for a new beginning in the next cycle. It is a narrative that teaches acceptance of impermanence and faith in renewal, themes that resonate deeply within the Indian spiritual worldview. Whether one views the underwater ruins off the coast of Gujarat as the literal remains of Krishna's city or as those of an important later port that inspired the legend, their significance is undeniable. They stand as a powerful monument to the dynamic relationship between land and sea, and to the human impulse to build magnificent cities on the ever-shifting boundary between the two. The search for Dwarka continues, with new technologies and expeditions hoping to uncover more of its secrets. But perhaps its greatest gift is the dialogue it has fostered, a conversation between the whispers of ancient scripture and the silent testimony of stone blocks on the ocean floor, a conversation that reminds us that sometimes the most incredible stories are those that wait for the tides to recede, just enough to show us they might have been true all along. Yet after the divine cataclysm that claimed Krishna's Dwarka and the spiritual austerity of the quest for the Grail, we arrive at a mythical realm born from a far more earthly and immediate yearning, not for enlightenment or lost divinity, but for a full belly and a day without toil. We venture now into the uproarious, subversive, and deeply human dreamscape of Kokani, a legendary land that flourished in the popular imagination of medieval Europe's peasantry. This was not a paradise promised by the church or a heroic quest from a royal court. This was a folk fantasy, a collective daydream sketched on the walls of taverns and whispered in fields, a place where the oppressive hierarchy of feudal life was not just inverted but utterly obliterated by absurd abundance. The laws of nature, society, and even basic physics were gleefully suspended in Kokani. Imagine a world where roasted pigs trotted past you, a knife conveniently wedged in their backs, politely asking to be eaten. Rivers flowed not with water but with rich wine and ale, while mountains were made of perfectly seasoned pudding. The weather itself was perfected, with warm, gentle showers of sweet custard or honey falling from the sky. Most importantly, the defining curse of medieval life, ceaseless, backbreaking labor, was completely absent. In Kokani, work was not only unnecessary but punishable by law. The concept was a direct, deliberate inversion of the peasants' reality, where they spent their lives working the land for a pittance. Here the land worked for them. Sleep was the primary occupation, and idleness was the greatest virtue. Fences were made of sausages, houses of cake, and the only requirement was to indulge one's every gluttonous whim without a moment of effort. This was a land where the goose indeed laid golden eggs and the fountains spouted laughter instead of water. This vibrant myth was far more than simple whimsy. It was a potent form of social satire and a crucial pressure valve for a society buckling under immense strain. The medieval peasant's life was defined by famine, disease, the relentless demands of their lord, and the ever-present shadow of death. Kokani offered a mental escape hatch, a shared cultural joke that allowed people to laugh at the very system that oppressed them. By depicting a world where food was limitless and authority was meaningless, the myth provided a psychological release from the grim realities of scarcity and servitude. It was a fantasy of autonomy where one's worth was measured not by obedience or piety, but by one's capacity for enjoyment. This vision was frequently depicted in bawdy art and recited in vulgar poems, often during festivals and feast days when the normal social order was temporarily turned upside down. In these sanctioned moments of carnival, the idea of Kokani became a temporary reality, allowing common people to act out their deepest desires for a life of ease and equality before returning to their arduous existence. The brilliance of the Kokani myth lies in its universality. While the name is uniquely European, the concept of a land of lazy luxury is a global phenomenon, appearing in cultures across the world under different names and with local flavors. In the United States during the Great Depression, the folk song Big Rock Candy Mountain became the hobo's version of this ancient dream. Sung by migrant workers riding the rails, it described a paradise where cigarettes grew on trees, the police had wooden legs, and lemonade springs flowed alongside a lake of stew. The parallels are unmistakable. Both myths emerge from communities experiencing profound hardship and displacement, and both imagine a world where life's basic necessities, food, shelter, and freedom from authority, are effortlessly obtained. Similarly, in Chinese folklore, the tale of the Land of the Peach Blossoms describes a hidden, utopian society that lives in peace and prosperity, untouched by the wars and taxes of the outside world. Psychologically, these myths serve an identical, crucial function. They are not merely idle fantasies, they are coping mechanisms for societies under extreme stress. By collectively imagining a world where their struggles are not only solved but rendered ridiculous, people can forge a sense of solidarity and hope. The myth provides a shared language of desire, a common dream that reinforces community bonds in the face of shared suffering. It allows for a gentle mocking of the powerful by presenting a reality where their power is irrelevant, and it nurtures the resilience needed to endure another day. The land of Kokani and its global cousins remind us that the human spirit has an incredible ability to manufacture hope, to conjure visions of plenty in the midst of poverty, and to find laughter even in the darkest of times. These stories are testaments to our enduring hunger for a better world, a hunger so powerful it can imagine mountains of pudding and rivers of wine, if only to make the plain bread and water of reality a little easier to swallow. But after the sunken ruins of Dwarka and the feasting halls of Kokani, we arrive at perhaps the most controversial and ethically fraught chronicle of them all, a story not from ancient texts but from a modern journalist's tape recorder, a tale that emerged from the deepest green shadows of the Amazon to captivate the world of fringe history. This is the enigma of the lost city of Akaka, a legend born not millennia ago, but in the early 1970s from the claimed testimony of one man. German journalist Karl Brugger was working in Manaus, Brazil, when he encountered a man who called himself Tatanka Nara, who claimed to be the prince of a hidden underground kingdom. Brugger was captivated, conducting a series of interviews that would form the basis of his 1976 book, The Chronicle of Akaka. The story Tatanka Nara told was a breathtaking fusion of ancient astronaut theory and lost civilization lore. He described how, over 15,000 years ago, his people, the Amongulala, were visited by gods who arrived in golden ships from a planet called Schwerter. These extraterrestrial beings, whom they called the Ancient Fathers, gifted them advanced knowledge and helped them construct an immense subterranean city complex named Akaka, carved deep beneath the Amazon rainforest, complete with 13 underground cities and a network of stone tunnels spanning thousands of miles. This account was a perfect storm of pseudo-archaeological themes, blending Erich von Däniken's popular ancient astronaut ideas with the enduring allure of a hidden, advanced society in the Amazon, much like Percy Fawcett's Lost City of Z. According to Tatanka Nara's chronicle, the gods eventually departed, leaving behind a sophisticated calendar and a prophecy of their return. The Amongulala people were then left to guard their vast underground world, surviving great cataclysms and weathering the arrival of European colonizers, all while remaining completely isolated from the modern world. Brugger presented this not as a folk tale, but as a factual historical record dictated to him by a primary source, complete with specific dates, battles, and intricate descriptions of Akaka's temples and technology. The book became an instant sensation within alternative history circles, its timing impeccable, riding a wave of global fascination with UFOs, pyramid power, and the idea that our textbooks had gotten everything wrong. It offered a seemingly credible first-hand account that connected the dots between disparate mysteries, providing a single, grand narrative that explained the origins of civilization and the secrets of the Amazon in one sweeping saga. The story's journey from obscure book to international phenomenon was fueled by tragedy and mystery. In 1984, Carl Brugger was murdered in a seemingly random street shooting in Rio de Janeiro, an event that conspiracy theorists immediately linked to his explosive knowledge of Akaka. His death transformed the story from a curious tale into a dangerous secret, suggesting that powerful forces were determined to keep the truth hidden. This notoriety was further amplified by subsequent television documentaries and the explorations of others drawn to the mystery. Most famously, the Swiss author Erich von Däniken, whose own work had inspired so much of the mythos, featured Tatanka Nara in his programs, lending his considerable platform to the prince's claims. Even the mainstream series Unsolved Mysteries dedicated a segment to the story, introducing Akaka to millions of viewers and cementing its place in popular culture. Each new retelling added layers of detail and speculation, transforming Tatanka Nara from a lone storyteller into the enigmatic gatekeeper of one of the world's last great secrets. However, the glittering facade of this modern myth began to crumble under the weight of investigation. Journalists and researchers who attempted to verify the story or even find Akaka encountered a web of contradictions and dead ends. The most damning evidence emerged from investigations into Tatanka Nara himself. It was discovered that his real name was likely Gunther Hawk, a German mechanic from Bavaria who had abandoned his family and fled to South America in the late 1960s. His claims of indigenous ancestry were debunked. He was a European man who had skillfully crafted a new identity for himself in the jungle. Even more disturbing were the fates of those who accompanied him on expeditions to find Akaka. Several people, including American tourist John Reed and Swedish adventurer Dagmar Hagelin, vanished without a trace after going into the rainforest with him. While Tatanka Nara was investigated in connection with these disappearances, no definitive proof of foul play was ever conclusively established in a court of law, leaving a permanent stain of suspicion and tragedy on the entire affair. The ethical implications of the Akaka narrative are profound and deeply troubling. At its heart, it represents a form of modern cultural appropriation and a profound disrespect for real indigenous Amazonian cultures. By inventing a spectacular fiction of extraterrestrial gods and underground empires, it effectively erases the actual, rich, and complex histories of the living indigenous peoples of the Amazon. It suggests that the only history worth telling about the region is a sensational, fantastical one invented by a European, rather than the true stories of resilience, adaptation, and cultural depth belonging to the native communities themselves. This myth also fuels a dangerous form of tourism and exploration. Treasure hunters and amateur adventurers inspired by such tales often venture into protected and ecologically sensitive areas, sometimes trespassing on indigenous lands and disrespecting sacred sites in their quest to find proof of a fiction. This not only poses a threat to the environment, but also to the sovereignty and safety of isolated tribes who wish to remain undisturbed. Ultimately, the Chronicle of Akaka is a powerful case study in how modern myths are born and why they persist. It fulfills a deep human desire for mystery and a simpler, more magical explanation for the unknown. It is far more thrilling to imagine a hidden city built by space gods than to grapple with the complex, gradual, and very human story of how cultures actually developed in the Amazon basin. The story persists because we want it to be true. It offers the promise of a world still filled with undiscovered wonders, waiting for a bold explorer to find them. Yet this desire comes at a cost. It distracts from the very real wonders of the Amazon, its incredible biodiversity and the vibrant, enduring cultures of its people, and replaces them with a hollow fantasy. The lost city of Akaka is a mirror reflecting our own fantasies back at us, a cautionary tale about the stories we choose to believe and the real-world consequences that can follow when we privilege a compelling lie over a complex and often more beautiful truth. And there we have it, 30 incredible chronicles of sacred realms that have captivated human imagination for millennia. From the sunken spires of Atlantis to the healing shores of Avalon, from the divine promise of Eden to the shimmering mirage of El Dorado, we've journeyed across continents and cultures through time and belief. These are more than just stories. They are mirrors reflecting our deepest fears and our highest hopes. They speak of our longing for a golden age, our terror of divine punishment, our insatiable curiosity about the unknown, and our eternal quest for meaning in a world full of mysteries. What's truly remarkable is how these myths, born in isolation from each other, so often echo the same profound themes: a flood that cleanses the world, a paradise lost through human error, a city of gold that vanishes upon approach. These recurring motifs suggest something fundamental about the human experience, a shared psychological landscape where our collective dreams and nightmares take shape. They remind us that the line between history and legend has always been thin, often woven from the same threads of memory, observation, and the irresistible urge to make sense of the world through narrative. So, which of these stories surprised you the most? Was it the scientific origins of Lemuria, born from a theory about lemurs? The very real, tangible evidence for a drowned kingdom like Country Guelod, where petrified forests still emerge at low tide? Or perhaps the shocking modern twist of Akaka, a 20th century myth that shows our capacity for crafting new legends is as strong as ever? Let us know in the comments below. We're genuinely curious to hear which chronicle resonated with you and why. And do you think any of them hold a kernel of truth? It's a fascinating question. As we've seen, archaeology and science have a way of turning fantasy into reality, or at least offering a plausible historical route for a tall tale. The discovery of Troy taught us that epic poetry can be a map. The LiDAR scans in the Amazon revealed that Percy Fawcett wasn't entirely wrong, just looking for the wrong kind of city. Perhaps the next great discovery is waiting just beyond the next dune, or beneath the next wave, ready to rewrite our understanding of the past once more. If this journey through the world's greatest mysteries has sparked your curiosity, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you won't miss our next adventure into the shadows of history. We have so many more enigmatic tales to explore together. Lost books, unexplained artifacts, and ancient riddles that have puzzled scholars for centuries. Thank you for joining us on this grand tour of humanity's most enduring legends. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop wondering what might be waiting just out of sight for